You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as the former bass player for the band Idle Sons, and he's gone on to have an incredible career in the live event space as the guitar tech, as the backline tech, as the stage manager, as the tour manager for all these incredible popular bands like Blue Rodeo, like Finger 11, like Matthew Good, like Simple Plan, just to name a few. We're going to dive into all of them as we go, but we do have to get started here. So welcome to the podcast, Bruce Nicol. Bruce, how are you? And how excited are you to hit the road again with Theory of a Dead Man?
I'm doing well. I'm living life. Things are kind of back to normal-ish for now, so it's going well. It's been a really busy summer for anybody in the industry. If I was going to put up like the little billboard, if you wanted to get into it, now's the time. For most of us out there, the phone has been ringing off the hook all summer, so it's been really busy, and everybody's in a really good space again, and hopefully we'll be able to continue.
That's awesome. Yeah, for a period of time while I was doing these interviews during the pandemic, and man, musicians and live audio guys, it was such a sad time. I remember after the pandemic, I went and I saw Billy Talent here in Ottawa with Rise Against, and the singer Ben was almost in tears because he's like, I didn't know if I would ever see live faces like this again. So it's pretty sad.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point, especially at the beginning, when nobody really knew, the length and breadth of how this was going to be, where, everybody was pretty nervous, pretty worried, like maybe it's never coming back. The people were saying this was going to go on for 5-10 years, and there were companies and even our government, with a little bit of outreach trying to keep people going was great, but emotionally it was really difficult, and it was cool seeing bands try and find a way to get their message out, to still make music and make art. We did a lot of live streams. We did a lot of video sessions, a lot of Zoom sessions and stuff like that. But
did you do any of those kind of drive-in concerts? Did you any of those?
I was pretty fortunate. We did like a little drive-in tour. I was working for the guys in Big Wreck, and we did like, I think 7 or 8 of them. So, we did one in Ottawa, just outside of Ottawa. We did one in Ancaster or Manitoulin Island. There was a really big one downtown Toronto. They had a huge one that they had shows every Friday. So, and it was interesting, depending on the style of music, like with like Big Wreck, which is sort of, music, very musical. And, it's more than just about the visceral experience of standing shoulder to shoulder with someone. It felt sort of like you could sit in a car and kind of watch it, and it was sort of okay.
It was the next best thing, I guess.
Yeah, it was as close as you could get. I did some country ones with Tim Hicks, and those were kind of more apropos because, people were backing their pickup trucks into spots and sitting on the back of their pickup truck with their coolers, and it was like
that's like that's like better than a regular concert. That's like a perfect
it was sort of
setting.
Like exactly how you figure like every day would be for Toby Keith or something.
Yeah, that's so funny. So a recent guest that I had is a mutual friend of ours, so Dan Preston, and
yes.
I was going to bring him up at some point, but what's funny is when you mentioned during the pandemic where it's like, we're not sure what's going on. He was saying that, he started, he's a guitarist with Clark Nova, but he started on the studio side of audio, and he remembers with Pro Tools and downloading kind of the studio, being a studio audio engineer, those gigs were kind of drying up a bit. And he saw that like, the opportunities were drying up, and he thought, I'll go into the live event space where,
Yeah.
I mean, that'll never end. And then he ends up in a pandemic. So it was kind of like he never saw that one coming.
Yeah, it was always a joke that we always shared, kind of people amongst the industry, which was like, live music is recession-proof. It was always the joke, right? If there's a recession and times are tough, people go to concerts, take their mind off of all the hard times, celebrate, a hard-fought week at work or whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, nope, nobody can do anything ever, anywhere, maybe forever. And yeah, a lot of guys were like, what happened? Like, this was supposed to be the one thing we could always do, which is to get together as a community, or, as friends or people that love music, and congregate. And it's like, nope, can't do that. And, this was the next best thing, right? Was get on the old robot box and talk to somebody on the other side of the world, and hopefully their shared experience is only partially as miserable as yours.
Yeah, I like to start these interviews by sharing with our listeners how I know the guests. So, the music industry, it's very important, the networking and building communities, building relationships. And in our case, it's because of Dan Preston that we just mentioned, is how we ended up with this interview. So I always ask my guests, hey, is there anyone that would make for a great interview? And Dan Preston had one person. He said, Bruce Nicol, that's it. With all the people he's worked with, he just had one person that he recommended. So,
man.
So I start, digging into your information just to see who you are and preparing and all that stuff. And then suddenly it hits me. I'm like, wait, I know this guy. So to bring this way back, so we're going to talk about your band Idle Sons. So way back in the day, both of our bands were in the same community, at least in Ontario. And I remember seeing you guys, Idle Sons, perform at Mavericks in Ottawa. And I remember actually sitting with a group of people, including you, against the wall, and you were talking about the Junos. And I think at that point, you guys already knew that maybe this was one of your last tours. Then I saw you at Barrymore's with Channel One, which is a band that we used to play with a lot, some friends of ours. And then years later, I end up working the Junos, and I'm backstage, and my job is to help kind of the musicians and celebrities move around from arriving at the arena to going on stage, all that stuff. And I see Justin Nozuka, who I'm a fan of. I see him backstage kind of practicing with his guitar and singing. And then I see you, and I'm like, man, he looks familiar. I think that's maybe the bass player from Idle Sons, but I didn't say anything. I didn't, I'm professional, didn't approach you guys. And then years later, I worked at Metalworks for 7 years, more on the studio and the school side, the institute side. And, every now and then I'd see you at the production company for the live sound stuff. And I'm like, man, I'm sure this is the Idle Sons guy. So it was like over years, I kept seeing you, but just, never bugging or approaching you. So then I went back to Dan, and I'm like, man, was he in Idle Sons? Did he do this? Was he at Metalworks? He's like, yeah, that's the dude. So what's funny is by the time I reached out, I had a whole narrative of like, oh, actually we have a history together, which was cool. So
yeah, well, it's kind of, this business is kind of built on small coincidences. Like, I got the job at Metalworks through John Watt, who was our sound guy when I was in Idle Sons. I knew Dan originally from Clark Nova, because one of the first tours we did in the late 90s was touring with Clark Nova just before Dan joined the band. So it all kind of comes full circle. And then me and Dan ended up working for Figure 11 together for a short period. And he took over as tour manager after I left. So yeah, it's a world of coincidences. Another funny one is I do some work for Tim Hicks, who's a Canadian country singer. And he's got this band of just absolute assassins, like killer musicians, right? Andrew McTaggart, who plays with, who's for another Burlington guy, actually.
He plays with Brian Mello, doesn't he?
And Brian Mello and a bunch of other guys. And Jeff Willingham, who's the other guitar player in Tim's band. And it was the first day I had gone to work for him. Walked into rehearsals, see Jeff standing there, and I'm like, I know you. And he looks at me, he's like, I know you. It's like, I was like, you were in Rebel Emergency. He's like, yeah, you were in Out of Sons. It's like, we had the same manager. We used to compete for resources all the time. It's like, oh my God, no way. And, for me, that's kind of like my whole career has been that, like little coincidences where you end up somewhere and discover that you've known that person for, an unspecified period of time without actually realizing you knew that person. And that's kind of how the community is up here.
Yeah, now that I've done 70 plus interviews with these amazing people in the music industry, it's like the same people come up in almost every interview, that this guy played drums for this band and this band and this band. This guy managed all of these bands. They were all signed to that record label. This was the guitar tech for Big Rec and for this band and for that band. So, man, you do not want to have a bad reputation, because this is a small industry.
Yeah, it's a small industry, and it's pretty tight knit. Everybody kind of knows everybody for the most part. And there's not a lot of room to be a bad person. If you're not a good guy, you don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most skilled. But if you're not a good hang and you're not a good person to be around, your phone's not going to ring too frequently.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I wanted to start this episode off powerfully. So I got some kind words from Dan Preston. So Dan's helping me out. Dan says this. He says, I've toured with a lot of techs, and very few match what Bruce brings to the table. His skill set, work ethic, wit, and humor are second to none. He swings at everything, and the result is always a home run. Hell of a tech and a pleasure to be around. Hoping we get to do more together soon. So that's Dan Preston.
Oh, Dan, he's such a sweetheart. Dan is sort of, in my mind, kind of what I envision like unbridled joy at times. When he's out there doing his thing, mixing shows, you just see like he's so excited and so happy to be out there working, even before the pandemic. Like he's just that guy he wants to be there. He wants to do the job. He wants to do a good job. And, as much as he talks about my wit and comedy, he's actually a pretty hilarious guy himself.
You guys would be a good combo out on the road together, I think.
Dan's a good combo with just about anybody. Yeah, I don't think I've really seen him like work with someone and like them not really click. He's just such an open guy. He's an open book. If he's upset about something, he'll tell you. He's like, I'm upset about this or whatever. Or he's frustrated, whatever it is. It's I think the best way to operate, is to be an open book and to not hold things against people or stuff your emotions down. If you got a problem going on, you got to talk to somebody about it. You can't just let it fester, because out there it's the worst thing ever.
So we're gonna do a deep dive. We're gonna go through your music career as a bass player. We're gonna go through the career of Idle Sons. We're gonna go through all the live stuff that you've been doing with all the different bands. We're gonna try to wrap it up with a nice bow at the end. So let's go way back to the beginning.
Okay.
Where did this, like, you are super passionate about music in the industry. Where does this love of music come from? And is there maybe a earliest musical memory that stands out to you?
Yeah, my earliest musical memory is about my dad. So my dad's not a musician per se, but when I was a kid, he had a little old Silvertone acoustic guitar that he had when he was a kid. And he grew up in rural Nova Scotia, and he learned to play guitar by this one-armed man that was a war vet from the First World War. So the kids on the street would be the right hand and strum the guitar, and the old man would sort of form the chords and tell the kids what the chords were.
This sounds like the stuff of legends. I love this.
Well, this is exactly what happens when you grow up in rural Nova Scotia, I think. As my dad gets older, the more folksy his childhood becomes. But so he knew about 4 chords, and he could play a song called Froggy Went A-Courtin'. And he would play it for me and my older sister. I would have been about like 4 or 5 or 6. And I thought it was like the best thing. And he would tell us, well, this is a G chord and this is a C chord. And, I didn't find out till like 20, 30 years later that the chords he thought were G, C, A, and F were like B minor, A sharp. It was like the old man had taught him the wrong names for the chords that he was playing. But that was sort of a big imprint. My mom's from the Caribbean. She's from Trinidad and Tobago. So we grew up listening to steel drum music and soca, the Merry Man, and Byron Lee and the Dragonaires on the turntable. And my dad's from the country, so he loves George Jones and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. So that was sort of my childhood.
And how did you gravitate towards actually playing an instrument? Was bass the first instrument? Because you play guitar as well.
The first instrument was kind of guitar, and then drums, and then guitar, and then bass. My sister is actually a very accomplished clarinetist. She had like a scholarship to go to university in the States on it, and she ended up not doing that, but she's a super gifted musician. And in Burlington, where we live, there's a marching band called the Teen Tour Band, and my sister was in the marching band, and my parents kind of tried to steer me into it as well, so they wouldn't have to go worry about me running off being bad. In about grade 6, I decided I wanted to learn to play guitar. I don't really know. I think the real reason was I had Slippery When Wet and wore out the first side and thought it was the coolest thing ever. So I wanted to learn to play guitar. So she got me lessons with a very kind old British gentleman who had a little basement studio up the street, and he taught me how to read music.
Did he have 2 arms? Did this guy have 2 arms?
He did have 2 arms.
Oh, that's good. Okay,
his name was Aubrey Rolfe, and he had written a book on theoretical music composition, which is like claim to fame. So most of my guitar lessons was actually learning how to read music and musical theory. So I never really ended up being very good at guitar. So fast forward a couple of years, and yeah, I ended up being in this marching band with my sister and like 200 other kids from Burlington. And I didn't play an instrument, so they were like, well, you can play in the drum section. So, you know, they gave me a pair of cymbals, and I marched around with cymbals for a year and decided, well, you know, like if I'm going to do this, I should maybe learn to drum. So I took drum lessons from a gentleman named Jeff Tomlinson in Burlington, who taught most of the kids in that drum line, and really learned to love rudimental drumming and music. And it was like, oh, awesome. I like this. I'm pretty good at it. So I was in the band throughout my high school years in marching band and stuff. And that's where I met Ryan, who was the drummer of Vital Sons. I know that might be a story we can tell later, but he was also in the band, and we were in drumline together. And he started a band when we were, I guess, in grade 9. He was in a band. He was like, come join this band. And I was like, okay, well, I can kind of play guitar still. So, you know, I started practicing guitar again and played guitar for a while. And then one night he called me and he was like, you should play bass. I was like, but I play guitar. He's like, no, like, you're not listening to me. Like, you should play bass. You know, like with like, I'm sure an implied wink over the telephone line.
Yeah.
Like, maybe guitar's not for you. So, you know, I ended up borrowing a bass guitar from a guy that I was friends with in high school. And we tried it. And I was like, hey, this is way more my speed. You know, I have pretty big hands. So like really complex chords are kind of hard for me to form. But on a bass guitar, I could get around pretty good. And, you know, all of a sudden, when you start playing the instrument, you start listening for it. And then, you know, you start listening. Like, I've always been a huge Zeppelin fan, and it's like John Paul Jones, you know, arguably one of the greatest rock and roll bass players of all time. It's like, oh, okay, there's some really cool stuff here. And that's the progression, as it were.
So you said John Paul Jones. Who else would you say were your biggest bass influences?
Definitely, although I cannot play like him, James Jamerson. Who I think almost every modern rock and roll or modern music bass player has to sort of bow down to. All of your favorite Motown hits are either Jamerson or Bob Babbitt. What's Going On? Arguably the greatest bass line ever conceived in a pop song. That's Jamerson. Robert DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots is an absolute monster. He was a huge influence on me. The same thing, I wanted to play like him. I don't think I ever got there, but I wanted to. And, you know, and then other bass players I see now, like Dave McMillan from Big Wreck is like inspiring. He's incredible. I don't know how he does it. You know, he's just phenomenal player.
So DeLeo, that's the brothers, right? And
yes, Robert and Gene.
Yeah. So I just had Bill Priddle from Trouble Charger on, and he shared a story that they were on tour with the Foo Fighters and the two brothers from Stone Temple Pilots. It was one of their other bands, and
Yeah.
he was saying the brothers were like the nicest guys ever. Like
Yeah.
every show they would come and say hi. I think they actually went out and like bought him a pedal, or there's something like they went above and beyond for them.
They
So
they really do seem like really great guys. I had an opportunity to meet Robert and Dean a couple of years ago on Theory of a Dead Man, who I work for. We were doing a bunch of shows with Stone Temple Pilots in the US and in Japan. And their front of house guy was friends with our drum tech. And he was like, oh, like Hootie, this is Bruce, like come introduce him to the guys. And I fully clammed up. It was sort of like, oh, hey, yeah, cool stuff. And then I just bailed because I was like, I'm making a fool of myself. I got to get out of here. But they were super sweet guys and just a phenomenal band.
As a kid, before you realized that you wanted to be a musician, was there anything else that you wanted to be?
Astronaut, space cowboy, until I found out that's not a thing.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. I really wanted to be a locomotive engineer because my grandfather worked on the railway, and I thought that was really cool. And my dad really likes trains, and that was like a childhood bond, which was pretty funny. He's like, well, let's go watch some trains, which was actually code for like, why don't you sit silently here
as long as possible?
As long as possible, And my parents fostered any ridiculous ambition that crossed through my mind. Both my mom and my dad were almost always totally on board, like there was never that's ridiculous, I wanted to be an astronaut, so they bought me like a series of books. And at the age of 8, that seems like a totally plausible thing, like I could work at a convenience store or I could be an astronaut. Like, what's the difference? And these little National Geographic books, one was called Let's Go to the Moon. And it made it look like it was totally attainable. So I was like, yeah, astronaut, that's me. It wasn't until, I probably around the age of like 9 or 10 when I realized, oh, I need to be like really, really smart. Okay, well, that's probably not for me. And flying makes me throw up. So yeah, that's probably definitely not for me.
You chose two equally improbable careers, making it in the music industry or being an astronaut. So
yeah, well, it is making it in the music industry was something that just sort of happened. I never really set out a goal saying like, I'm going to be a great star, or I'm going to do this. I just wanted to be around it. I loved music. I love music. I still love music, all kinds, from modern rock, heavy metal, reggae, country and western, classical music. I love Shostakovich. And just being around it, to be a success was, I guess in my mind is in your mind, you're a success if you think you're successful. But I'm just glad to be able to be around it.
If I met you at 12 years old, so if you're 12,
okay,
who am I meeting? Describe this person at 12. Still dreams of an astronaut or
no? By 12, I was successfully running a very tiny software piracy ring with some of my friends. We had the Apple IIc computers in grade school, right, which ran off the little floppy disk, and we discovered that if you punched a hole on the side of it with a hole punch, you could copy the discs. So we had like a little ring of guys that we'd all, oh, I got Below the Root. Well, I got Alice in Wonderland. And we'd all be copying each other's video games for our Apple computers. I was pretty obsessed with hockey. I was in much better shape than I am now.
Did you play or you watched?
Nintendo nerd. What was that?
Did you play hockey or you watched?
Yeah, hockey? I played hockey for like probably 10 years. Definitely like every good Canadian boy, learned to skate, watched the Leafs. I loved hockey. I loved it so much. I was not great at it, but I liked to play. I told my mom and dad I wanted to play hockey, and they were like, all right, good luck. My dad had coached hockey regionally, so he knew a lot about the game and was, willing to be patient enough. You know, I was not a particularly well coordinated child. It took a long time for me to figure out how to catch a baseball, you know, but my old man we'd go out there every night and he'd throw the ball and I would not catch it, but he would say, all right, well, go get it. We'll try it again. And, you know, when it struck me in the chest and it didn't go past me, that was considered a major victory.
That was a catch. Yeah.
Yeah. That was as good as good as a catch. He'd say, well, that's as good as a catch. It didn't get past you, you know, and he definitely helped foster that idea of like, if you just don't give up, good things can happen. And that's kind of been my life.
Yeah, your parents sound awesome. So normally a little later on, I ask if you've dealt with any resistance. So normally someone that wants to become a musician, there's a lot of resistance from family and friends where they say, no, go to school, get a good job, play it safe. You know, the music industry, that is a pipe dream. It's 1 in a million. I think I know the answer, that your family was probably just supportive regardless of what you chose.
Yeah, they were relatively, I would say at first it was more of a passive acceptance. You know, like my parents have the typical 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, and, you know, our little bands, we used to jam in my parents' basement. And, you know, even the day before we got offered our first record deal, you know, I remember my mom shouting down the stairs, like, don't forget to do your homework. You're never going to make it. But she didn't mean it. It was mostly just to get me to do my homework. There was sort of an unspoken agreement that as long as I would still go to school, I could fool around with music and stuff as much as I wanted to, as long as I was going to go to school. And I did. I went to college. I sadly need half a credit to graduate from the computer science and information technology program at Mohawk, but I worked in the industry for like almost 2 years as a programmer before the band got signed. So I got to live in the real world for a bit.
It gives you a reference point to why you should appreciate every day doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, I was lucky. I worked in healthcare logistics as a programmer, a maintenance programmer mostly. And I had an awesome boss who was super rad, who loved music as well. And he understood that I had a band and sometimes I might need to go on tour and blah, blah, blah. And Tim was so cool about everything. He really loved Supertramp. He had a huge sub for his computer so he could listen to Breakfast in America while he wrote code. And he was just such a cool guy to work for. And we still talk from time to time. And, you know, yeah, a lot of people were kind of in my corner, kind of throughout my whole life so far. I'd like to say I don't think I have any enemies, but I'm sure I do somewhere.
That's funny. If you and I were friends at 16 and you invited me over to your place, I'm assuming in Burlington, what albums would you be playing for me as your 16-year-old friend?
Okay, so 16. What year is that? 1993?
That's a good year.
So I think it's 1993. It's somewhere around there. Yeah, it's 1993. I'm 16.
That's the middle of the grunge and the rock.
Yeah, it's the height of the grunge era. Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 1.
Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4.
No, I didn't really get hip to 3 until I was older. I was a 1 and 2 guy because they were like the real dirty blues rock records. And I didn't like 4 because I thought like, oh, people who casually like Led Zeppelin 4. You know, as much of a music snob as I was. The Southern Harmony Musical Companions by the Black Crowes. I remember buying that cassette and seeing on the back, it just said, this album was recorded in analog. And I thought that was like the coolest thing, even though I didn't realize that like most records at that time were still being recorded in analog because, you know, digital recording methods hadn't really cracked the mainstream just yet. I had this buddy named Jason Buzza, who I think lives in BC now, but he was like the guy who knew the coolest records. So he introduced me to the first STP record and a band from New York called Quicksand, which was like, and still to this day are like one of my favorite bands. They had a record called Slip that came out in the early 90s that was 20 years ahead of its time. If you ask people around, you know, that are in like rock, hard rock, if they know of the band Quicksand, most of them would say yes. And then obviously the first Rage Against the Machine album, You know, I can still remember hearing Bomb Track over the PA at like the little rock club that was in Burlington that we used to go to see shows, and being like, I don't know what this is, but I have to get this tomorrow. And then to find out, 20 some odd years later, to make a record with Garth Richardson, who made that record. It was like such a full circle moment for me. And yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, that debut self-titled album from Rage Against the Machine, which I think is 1992.
Yeah.
I always say I have 3 favorite albums, and that's in there. And I've had Garth Richardson, so Garth, I've had him on as a friend on Facebook for like a decade.
Awesome.
And yeah. He's provided quotes for guests on the podcast. I've still never asked him to be a guest because I'm just like terrified of like asking the ins and outs of that one album. It's like it's such a mythical album that it's like I'm afraid to talk to him about it. And I love he did a Chevelle album that I love.
Yeah.
And yeah.
He also did that first real big Rise Against record as well.
Siren Song.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, dude. And he's so much fun to work with. Like, we were fortunate, in the Idle Sons era where we got to make a record. We got to go down to LA and interview like 22 different record producers. We met with guys like David Bottrell and Bill Appleberry, Toby Wright, a very wonderful young man who had just made his first record by the name of Nick Raskulanitz, who showed up, with a mesh back hat and a Ford LTD and played us the new Foo Fighters album, one by one, which hadn't even been released yet. And, and Garth is very much so a super fun guy to make a record with.
I had David Bottrell as a guest a few months ago.
Oh, awesome.
Man, that guy's discography is so ridiculous.
Yeah,
I had so in the 2 hours, 25 minutes I spent asking Tool questions about the 2 Tool albums that he produced and mixed. And that 25-minute clip of Tool question and answers took off online because it's very rare to get like new content with Tool and behind the scenes. So that's one thing that really found its audience when the Tool fans discovered it. So
yeah, I remember we pitched our album to him, and we got a very polite and respectful thanks, but no thanks. You guys are a little too middle of the road for me, and we were devastated.
Yeah, around that time he's doing like Stain Chapter 5, and he's doing like Godsmack, and yeah, it's crazy. Did you play in a bunch of bands before Idle Sons, or that was one of the first bands that you were?
I think I played in maybe 2 or 3. Burlington in the 90s was ridiculous. Like, everybody was in a band. If you were to look up like a list on Wikipedia of like rock bands or bands from Burlington, Ontario, it's bizarre, because at the time I think the population of Burlington was like 100,000, and like the Spoons are from Burlington, Finger 11 or the Rainbow Butt Monkeys from Burlington, Grade, Jersey, Walk Off the Earth, Silverstein, Jordan from Alexa on Fire is from Burlington. There was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bands from Burlington. Everybody I knew was in a band. Everyone I knew, and if they weren't in a band, they were friends with someone in a band, or they were trying to manage a band, or they had a little studio. So I started off in a little blues band with Brian, who would become the drummer of Idle Sons. And we were called Wagon, which was one of those like time to name your band. Wagon.
Right now.
Sure. And then from there, I started jamming with Mike Eastick and Jeremy Crosskill, who were 2 of the original members of the band that turned into Idle Sons. Jared lived down the street from me, and he had been in a band with Mike and Sean Kelly, who also ended up being in Idle Sons. And he would be like, "Oh, you got to meet this guy." And we went to the same high school, had the same kind of circle of friends. And, we just started jamming, and the goal was to play a Christmas concert. And that ended up being like 14 years of my life for a Christmas concert.
So Idle Sons wasn't actually the original name of that band, right?
No, it was not.
Do you want to share the original name with our listeners?
The original name of the band was called Slurpee Monday.
And Monday was spelt differently, right?
Yes, because that was the thing you did in 94, is you couldn't spell things just correctly. That would be boring. But It all stemmed from, we had another band going, me and Jer. Well, I shouldn't say it was a band. We were jamming with another guy, a gentleman named Dave Wood, who's a super gifted guitar player and musician that lived down the street from Jer. I think he's like a real estate mogul now. He's a super great guy. But he was kind of had this like hardcore thing that he wanted to work on. And I was playing bass and Jer was playing drums and we were doing that. And, you know, the joke was like, oh, you know, like, we'll call that one Slurpee. And, you know, we were hanging out outside of Jer's place and he wanted to tell me that that band was jamming on Monday. So he went like, Slurpee, Monday. And I was like, what is that, a name or something? And it ended up being the name. We got signed to Atlantic without a name because we did the demos and everything and sent everything off. And our management at the time was like, we're not telling anybody that this is called Slurpee Monday because that's ridiculous. So we got signed under the name Monday. And then at about halfway through making the first record for Atlantic, they were like, you guys need a name and it can't be Monday. And that other name you had is a train wreck. So not that either. So we had to come up with a name and we came up with Idle Sons.
Which is a good name.
Yeah, it's an awesome name. And it actually has like a ton of meaning. And I'm totally going to screw it up because I didn't come up with a name. Ryan Barkwall, our drummer, came up with a name. And it had to do with how our generation, which I guess is Generation Y, I think I'm a Xennial. Anyways, our generation had no great cause to rally around. You know, like our parents came from the greatest generation, which was, you know, World War II. And, you know, there was all these great causes throughout our parents' life, segregation and voting rights and women's rights. And our generation had no great cause to rally around. So we were the idle sons of the rich, which meant like we're not doing anything with our lives. And, you know, he brought it up and I was, you know, everybody like was kind of like, that sounds pretty cool. So we took it to Atlantic and they're like, yeah, sure. You know, like what's in a name? We're like, well, you guys just made us have this huge like identity crisis. And now you're just like, yeah, that's fine. We were really hoping they'd be knocked out by it. And they really weren't.
Yeah. So the demos that got you the Atlantic deal, they were done with members of Finger 11?
Yes. I grew up with Rick Jacket. Rick was like that super cool dude that was a couple of years older than you that lived down the street. That was him. Back then he was like this really badass skateboarder. He had a shaved head. He had like a Bones Brigade hoodie. He could do wicked jumps and stuff. And he lived like maybe a block away from me and hung out on our street. I grew up on like a dead end street and he hung out on our street with some of the older kids on my street. And he was just like this super cool guy. And then when we got into high school, he was like the coolest guy in my high school. I went to a really small high school. Lester B. Pearson only had like, I think 460 students. And that's another place that like totally punches out of its weight class. Ryan Gosling went to our high school for a while.
Oh, you guys win right there.
Like, yeah, right? I mean, the guy, he was super nice in high school, by the way, too. Like, he had already done, like, Young Hercules and that stuff. And he was super cool, wasn't, like, really arrogant or anything. He hung out with the drama kids. I didn't know him personally, but he was friends with a few of my friends. And he was a really cool cat back then.
He's done a few things with his life.
Yeah, he's done a couple of things. But basically, Rick was in a band called the Rainbow Butt Monkeys with James and Scott, and Sean Anderson was friends with my older sister. And, you know, those guys went like, you want to talk about a fairy godmother, like beyond, above and beyond what you could do for someone to help them in their career. Like if there was a slot that they needed an opener for, they called us, you know, like anything. They took us on tour for the first time in Ontario. They took us on tour across Canada for the first time. They introduced us to the people that would become our managers, our agents, everything. They went way out of their way to try and make our band happen. And, you know, like to this day, I think I'll never be able to look any of those guys in the eye without like having this huge rush of gratitude for all the things they did for us. And then the time had come where we had finished a tour across Canada opening for them. And Rick and Jay were like, hey, like, we really want to like try and produce some songs for you guys. So our management at the time of Coalition they found this really great producer in North Toronto named Dom Condo, who had his awesome studio, and he was a super good guy, and he was willing to work on spec, which is a great term you hear in the music industry, which is, I'll do it for free until it's not for free, which was fine because the whole agreement was, come in and do these demos. If nothing happens, pay me this much. If something does happens, pay me this much, which was still a fair, reasonable amount. So it was like, yeah, that's a pretty darn good deal. So we went in, and I think we did it over the course of like 5 days. We went in and we recorded 3 songs with Rick and Jay and Dom engineering. And then I guess that could segue right into how the band got signed, because it's such a ridiculous story.
Yeah. So signed originally to Atlantic, right?
Yeah. So that was a total lightning in a bottle moment. And my life has kind of been surrounded by these crazy, ridiculous, serendipitous things where we finished these demos with Rick and Jay, and go backwards about a year. On Christmas Day, I got a phone call from some kid in California. His name was Kevin Carvel. He was 15 years old, and he really liked this band from Burlington called West Point. They had a guitar player by the name of Jeff Kenny. He was a super nice guy that I'm still pretty friend. I still hear from time to time. And, he had heard about us from this like 905 message board. And he's like, I think your band's pretty cool, man. I hope we can, you can maybe send me a tape or something. I hope we can keep in touch. And, and I kind of like put it out of my mind. And then we finished these demos, and, maybe a week later, I get a phone call, and it's this kid again. He's like, hey man, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Kevin Carvel. I really like your band. Remember we talked about that band West Point and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah. It's like, oh, well, I got a job. I'm an intern at Atlantic Records. I was like, you don't say. Okay, cool, man. I'll call you back. So I called our manager, Sarah, and I was like, hey, I'm just talking to this kid who's working for Atlantic as an intern. She's like, oh, okay, that's great. We're going to send this off to X, 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 and X record labels in the US. We're not really going to worry about Canada just yet. We're going to give it a spin down south and see what happens. So they sent the record down, and I think they sent it to 5 labels to see what would happen. And all 5 labels expressed some sort of interest. So it was Lava, which was a subsidiary of Atlantic that Simple Plan was signed to. Wind Up, which is the label that Finger 11 was signed to. Capitol Records, which they had a connection with, I think, through Rob and Rob Lanny. And I think the last one was EMI, or Virgin US. And Atlantic, they sent the disc to Atlantic to shut up this kid, Kevin, who kept calling every day, going, when am I going to hear these demos? I really like this band. When am I going to hear these demos? And this kid's an intern. So Sarah basically called us like, look, I sent this kid the record, to shut him up because this guy keeps calling me every day. So 2 days later, Craig Kalman, who was the president of Atlantic, called and just said, what do I have to do to sign this band? They asked us, and we just said, make us an offer we can't refuse. He said, cool, no problem. We'll be there in 5 days. So they flew up, and they offered record deals to 3 bands on the spot after seeing them play. One was a band called Pez from Orangeville or Streetsville, which we now know and love as Billy Talent. That was that's another great story. If you ever get to talk to Ian or Ben, their story of getting their deal with Atlantic is just as serendipitous.
They were a band for a long time before that.
Yeah, they had been a band forever. And we had done shows with them when they were Pez at the 360 or any of the Queen Street clubs that everybody, you ran through them all, once a week or whatever. So Atlantic made us the offer, and then, they flew up and they offered 3 bands deals that day. There was a band from, I think Mississauga called The Livid that had this incredibly good guitar player named Chris. And I think the story was one of the guys in the band was like, I think I want to go to university, and sank them on the spot. But they came up and they made us an offer, and we actually did say no, because that was the thing, never take your first offer. So we said no, and they said, are you serious? And Andy Karp, who was running Lava, had made a counter offer, and they were like, oh, we see that Lava is making an offer. They're like, we own that label, so they're not making an offer anymore. We're like, oh,
Wah,
okay.
wah.
We kind of see how this goes. All right, well, I guess the answer is yes then. And, you know, it was like the next thing you knew, it was we were moved to California and we're making a record down there.
So you make that record, which would have been Hell or High Water.
Yeah, we made that record. We did all the demos the summer of 2002. We recorded it throughout most of 2003. So we moved down to California. We lived in the Oakwood apartments. We did all the great things that you used to get to do back then. You know, we did all these tours of all these studios and met all these producers. And we settled on this Scottish producer, Gavin McKillop, who had worked on a couple of In Excess records and Midnight Oil. And his big one was a band called The Church. It was like a really gothy kind of band. But he had worked on a record for Atlantic from a band called Audio Event, which was all the brothers of the guys in Incubus. For real. Look them up. They're actually, they made a great record with Gavin. But what he did to sell us on it was he played the demos they brought to him, and then he played the finished record. And it was like, oh, okay, I see. Like, wow, that's a huge difference. And he was a guy with a really strong background in musical theory. And we fought tooth and nail with this guy for 8 months to make this record, where he just had a different sensibility than we did. And it was almost like we spoke different languages sometimes, you know, like, oh, I want it to sound big. Well, what does that mean? You know, I want it to sound wide, or I want it to be heavy. You know, for us, heavy means more gain, more guitars. For him, heavy meant like more low end, darker subject matter. So there was a lot of like arguing and fighting, and Atlantic poured tons of money into us. And they really, at the time, they really felt that things were going to be, it was going to be a successful record. And there was never a time when the four of us were more unified together than then. Fortunately, when we were about halfway through making the record, Tom Storms and Kevin Williamson, our two A&R guys, left the company. So we were left with no real leg to stand on except this poor kid, Kevin Carvel, who was about 18 by now.
Is he still an intern?
Guy, still at Atlantic, still in the industry, the only guy advocating for us. He went on to have a massive career in the music business, by the way. I think he's one of the executive producers on The Voice. He was the senior executive president of like Octone Records, like all this huge stuff. And he was just this wonderfully lovely kid that we drove around the bend. We pestered him and picked on him because he was like a little brother to us. But he was the only guy left at the company fighting for us. And that's sort of what kind of led to that whole thing kind of falling apart, basically. We were never officially dropped. The record was always like 2 weeks away from being on the schedule. And we couldn't figure it out because they had spent so much money on the band. You know, Chris Lord Alge mixed the record. You know, he mixed Thriller.
Yeah, some of those guys, it's like 10 grand a song to mix or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, you know, he mixed our record and the Billy Talent record the same week, and a POD record. And they had warned us, you know, like, he's really set in his ways and he's mean and he's tough and blah, blah, blah. And we come in to listen to comps, and he was like this super funny New York cat that smoked Parliaments and ate chocolate chip cookies at his console and was totally open-minded, you know, except if we had a ridiculous request. We had a song where we had snuck a triangle in there as a joke. And, you know, we're playing it down. He's like, is that a triangle? Do you guys have a triangle on your song? We're like, yeah. Can you turn it up? It's like, absolutely not. But yeah, it sputtered out with Atlantic, and we were just kind of in limbo for months and months and months. So we kind of had a meeting, us and Sarah had left Coalition, and a guy by the name of Julian Gruel had taken over as our manager, who just absolutely killed himself for us. Like, the guy worked so hard for our band. And he was like, I think we need to talk to these guys about maybe parting ways. So we put together a conference call with the few people we knew that were left, because everybody had been moved on except for poor Kevin, and a bunch of people who probably didn't even know our names, and said, you know, like, look, we made this record, and, you know, it's been like a year, nothing's happening. Do you guys think there's a possibility you would entertain letting us out of our contract? Which was a 6-album commitment that they had made at the time, which they don't do anymore. And they said, yeah, of course. Like, we don't like this record. It's not the direction we want to go. Here's the deal. We'll give you your record to shop your band to other labels. If somebody else is interested, we'll get back together and we'll talk about how we make that possible financially. And that's what ended up happening.
Wow. So after that, you guys, it was years. Wasn't it like 4 years before the next label?
Yeah, from the time we signed to Atlantic to the time the record came out was 4 years. That's the name 16 Seasons, which Julian Gruel came up with the name because we were terrible at naming things. Yeah, we had a couple of close calls. We almost signed to Wind Up. We went down to New York, lied our way over the border, which was an incredibly harrowing thing where we totally got caught with gear and no work visa trying to enter the United States. And we just fully George Costanza'd our way through it. Like, it's not a lie if you believe it to be true. And we had some absurd cover story about like going to a cousin's bar mitzvah or something ridiculous like that, right? Like, oh, it's my cousin Steven's quinceañera or whatever, right? Like, it's not even a thing. And, like the border guard is staring at us going like, I know you're lying. And we're like, no, it's true. It's like, no, I know you're lying. Like, this is obviously not true. None of you are Spanish. Like, we're like, no, it's true. We swear. And he's like, look, I'll let you go, but just know that I know you're lying. We're like, okay. And we went down and played a show at Irving Plaza, opening again for Finger 11 had opened their hearts once again to bail us out. Opening for Finger 11 with Local H at Irving Plaza, and Diana Meltzer, who was the head of A&R at Wind Up, came down to see the show and loved it. Said, we love it. We love it. Yeah, we want to sign it. So we were like, we're saved. And this is like 2005. So obviously it did not work. They ended up backing out, and then EMI kind of fell in our lap through another incredibly serendipitous coincidence, which, yeah, I guess I could go right into that. Before we signed to Atlantic, there was a guy at EMI Canada named Tim Trombley, who was, I think, the head of A&R at the time, liked the band, wasn't like over the moon about it, but liked the band, and had made a few calls inquiring about us, and then he fell off the radar, disappeared. We ended up finding out that he left the company for some personal reasons, and we were just lost in the shuffle. Nobody picked up that Post-it note and went, who are these guys? Never. So after we left Atlantic and the Wind Up deal fell through, Julian got one of those serendipitous phone calls, and it was Tim Trombley saying, hey, I just want you to know that I'm back at EMI, and I'm still kind of interested in this band, Monday or whatever they're called. And he's like, well, they're called Idle Sons, and we're signed to Atlantic, but it kind of ended. We're looking for a home. And he's like, okay, well, send me what you have. So, we send him a completed, $1 million record. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, we think we can do something with this. And then he left the company again, but passed it on to Fraser Hill and Rain Monroe at EMI, who were huge advocates for us in the end. And we're on board from the get-go. And they said, okay, we want to do something. This record feels a little dated because it's 3.5 years old now. We're going to hook you up with a producer, and why don't you guys record some new songs? And the producer was Garth Richardson. And 2 of the 4 new songs ended up being singles. So it was worth it. And we went up to BC for a month and worked with Garth and a gentleman by the name of Ben Kaplan.
Was that the warehouse?
No, it was Garth has a studio on the Sunshine Coast called The Farm.
The Farm.
Where he's got sort of a farmhouse with a wonderful SSL console and all the amps you could ever dream of and all the great toys that we all love and a little A-frame cottage that you stay in and you just live there. And, I think we did that over 21 days. We did 4 new songs and then re-recorded 2 old songs and then changed 3 other old songs. And that was what ended up being 16 Seasons.
So finally in 2006, 16 season comes out after all those years of like purgatory with record labels and shopping demos and all that stuff. That album has 3 singles. So there's Tell Me, Waiting Around, and Maggot. I actually owned that album when it came out. I was a fan. Tell Me was a legit top 20 hit in Canada. And like I mentioned, I went out to see you guys play twice around that time. What thoughts, memories, emotions come back when you think to that album finally coming out after everything you've been through? And it's a great album. Like you guys actually pulled through.
Well, we always believed it would be a great album if it ever got out there. It did get out there by accident at one point. The Atlantic record got leaked by some industrious friends who meant the best at the time. But if there's an infamous 13-song sampler, which is the record we made for Atlantic, plus 3 B-sides that were never going to be released, that got out there. But we really felt like we had something. It's kind of funny. Like, I've never really been someone to like brag or feel overly confident about anything in my life. But in the back of my head, I always knew we had something. That's because we had a great singer who could write great songs in Mike, and we had a great drummer in Ryan, and a really great guitar player in Sean. And I was kind of the guy who was sort of along for the ride, I guess, in my mind. You know, if someone tells me I was good at bass, I kind of, smile and nod, but I never really felt that way. But, it was vindication. You felt justified that all the work, all the heartache, I mean, we're talking really relative to music, the suffering, it's not like starving to death suffering, but, the emotional toll it takes on you, of working so hard for something, thinking you've gotten it and then having it taken away, and then thinking you've gotten it and having it taken away. When the record finally did come out, it felt really gratifying. And, we were so lucky, they say it takes an island, or it takes a village. There were so many people behind the scenes working so hard to keep us afloat in those years. And then once the record came out, there was, those same people kept pushing and kept pushing and kept us, on people's radar and kept, and kept it going and really helped us in a way that a lot of people who don't work in the industry wouldn't understand, especially because that kind of support isn't really there to that extent anymore. We literally had like a group of people who were dedicating most of their time to our success, regardless of our own designs.
Was Tell Me the first time you heard your own song on the radio? And if so, what was it like the first time hearing your own music on the radio?
It wasn't the first time per se, because of some local stuff that happened when we were younger. 97.7 Hits FM in St. Catharines did a Battle of the Bands thing every year called Rock Search. The band that would become Finger 11 won it one year. The Trues won it one year.
Oh.
We didn't win it, but we tried. We applied, so to speak, and got, I think, to like the second round or something. But part of it was they play your song on the radio, and then people call in and vote on whether they like it or not. This is like the late 90s, so there's not really a lot of internet going on. And then after the Atlantic deal, we had kind of gotten into this position where we were doing a charity show, and Dean Blundell from CFNY heard about it, and then heard about the band, played a song, and was like, wow, I really like this. So he played it on the radio, regardless of the fact that it wasn't on CFNY's playlist. And they never once played Idle Sons. And he kept talking up the band. And to have, a guy on the biggest radio station, arguably, in our neighborhood, talking about the band that was pretty big. When we started hearing Tell Me on the radio in Canada for the first time you hear it, it just sort of passes you by, and you're just like, wait, did I just hear that? I think that might have been me. And then, maybe a few hours later or something, you hear it again. What really blows your mind is when you start hearing it on different radio stations. So, like 97.7 was really big supporter of our band, huge. 107.9 in Hamilton was also a massive supporter. And then out west, CJ in Calgary, Sea Fox in Vancouver, and the Bear in Edmonton, and the Wolf in Regina, I think.
I think in Ottawa, I would hear it on both 106.9 The Bear, and I think I would hear it on Live 88.5.
Live 88.5 definitely played it for sure. But it was the same sort of thing. Like when you start hearing it different places, then it starts sinking in like, oh, wow, like maybe this might be doing something, you know? And then when your friends start texting you or calling you and be like, hey, bro, like I'm in Edmonton and I just heard your song. Like, you know, that's when you're like, wow, this is really happening. Like this really is going somewhere. And for me, I mean, there was a huge wave of relief that like, okay, like this is all, you know, it's all coming together now. And, you know, and then there's like a little bit of doubt where you're like, well, what happens when they stop playing it? It's like, oh, geez, you know, like you can't even savor the victory for 1 minute, you know, you're always like, well, what do we do next?
Well, you did have 2 music videos that came out for Tell Me and Waiting Around. What was the experience like of making like legit big budget music videos? Was there anything memorable, anything that stands out from that time?
They're both super memorable. The Tell Me video, the memorable thing is that it took forever. The majority of that video was done in stop motion. So back then, sure what it's like now for bands, but when you decide that when you and the label decide that you're going to make a video, directors and producers submit treatments, right? Like a little mini script. Well, this is what the video is going to be. And I think we got 6 different treatments for Tell Me. And the one we ended up settling on was this video. It was almost all stop motion. So if you watch the video, which I think is still on YouTube somewhere, in the lowest resolution.
You didn't actually blow up a building in that video?
Oh, the Waiting Around video, that's stock footage.
Okay.
So the Tell Me video was just took forever because it was stop motion. So, you know, you'd play a passage for 5 seconds and it's like, all right, stop. All right, move your arm here. Okay, stop. Move your arm here. Okay, stop. Okay, we're going to put a clock on the wall. Okay, stop. Okay, now we're taking the clock off the wall. And just all these little details. And that's what we loved about the video, but it took forever. The Waiting Around video was a pretty easy day for all of us except for Mike. So
he had to do all he looked like he was in like Mission Impossible or something. He
yeah,
was like
EMI came to us with the idea of, we want to blow up your lead singer. And we were like, okay.
Excellent.
What do you mean? And they were like, look, we have a really good relationship with Warren P. Sonoda, who's like this huge award-winning video director that had made all these massive music videos. And he kind of likes the song and he wants to do a video. And he's got a connection with the effects team from X-Men 2. They were shooting that in Hamilton at the time. They were like, we're going to do like basically a performance video, but we're going to blow up your singer. We were like, okay, like we can get behind that. So basically we went and it was filmed on the 17th floor ballroom at the King Edward Hotel in Toronto, which at the time was abandoned. The ballroom was abandoned because everyone said it was haunted. And I think like they probably filmed 100 music videos there and probably 2 or 3 episodes of like Flashpoint or something. And they're like, so here's the thing, like you guys are going to perform the song. We're going to do some like fast editing and some quick cuts and stuff. And it's going to be real rocking. And interspersed with that, we're going to be shooting pyro at your singer. And he's going to be running through the building. So they took him aside in the rest of the building and literally were like, okay, run down this hallway. And they wouldn't really tell him, like, by the way, when you get to that door frame, it's going to explode. So he'd be running down the hallway and then the door would explode and he'd get knocked into the wall and fall down. It was all very safe, but the concept was that they were going to, someone is trying to kill him. And it turned out really awesome. It made us look and me feel cooler than I probably was, which was the whole goal.
Yeah, both music videos look pretty big budget. They look super professional.
No, they definitely were not afraid to invest in our band, regardless of how well it was going at the time. And, you know, Much Loud played the Waiting Around video like crazy. Back when Much Music played, not only back when Much Music played videos, but when Much Music had more than one video channel. They had the Much Loud channel, which was all hard rock and heavy metal. And they played that video tons, and it was huge for us. And, you know, you want to talk about a memory where you really feel like you've made it was the first time we played a headlining show in Calgary at the Gateway, which is a smallish pub, maybe like 450. It was really well attended, and people were singing the words to songs back to us. That's when it felt like, oh wow, like people really do know who we are. Because you were in a band around the same time. You spend so much time fighting to build an identity and to build an audience, and it never really feels like it's going somewhere until one day it suddenly is. And then you're like, oh, okay, so it is working.
Yeah, another metric that showed that things were happening was you guys got a Juno nomination. So this was for New Group of the Year in 2007. What does that Juno nomination mean to you? I mean, that's your country. That's Canada's Grammys. That's acknowledging your talent and your hard work.
Yeah, the Juno nomination is kind of bittersweet just because of where we were as a band at the time. By the time the nomination came, we were already talking about dissolving the band or breaking up. We sort of had some pretty strong riffs interpersonally amongst the four of us where we couldn't really get along anymore. Months on end in a van will do that to you. And so it was great. The recognition was amazing, but when I look back on it, it's also sort of like, well, that's kind of like where it all ended. But fun fact, I think almost every band that was nominated that year broke up before the Junos. I think Mobile won, and they deserved it. They're great guys, and I think they broke up shortly after. But they're back together now, making records again. So, the other ones were Evans Blue, which is a band that had a ton of success in the United States.
Oh man, they had I loved is it Cold? Evans Blue. They had one hit single called Cold.
I think that was Breaking Benjamin.
They had So Cold, yeah.
Oh yeah, So Cold, yeah. But yeah,
no, Evans Blue had this massive. It's like cold, but I'm still something.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was a massive fan of that one song. I didn't know the rest of.
The one guitar player in that band, Parker Lozon, was also from Burlington, and like we knew the guy and had no idea he was in this band because they almost exclusively worked in the U.S. But they were nominated. I think they broke up, but they got back together, and they're still making music. And Jets Overhead was, I think, the other band that was nominated. And I think they also broke up before the Junos.
I didn't even know that Evans Blue was Canadian. I guess you're saying that they were big in the U.S., and I have a U.S. association with them for some reason.
I think when they started the band, there were like 3 of the 5 guys were from Canada. And then as they progressed, it was like 1 of the 5 guys was from Canada. But they were definitely nominated that year as well.
That year had like the equivalent of like the Madden curse in football. Like whoever's on the cover of the Madden video game, it's like the next year gets injured or cut from their team or has a horrible season. So.
Well, for years and years and years, and I definitely hope I'm not speaking out of turn. A lot of people felt that award was like the kiss of death. Like if you won Best New Artist, something bad would happen to you the next year. In this turn of events, something just bad happened to all of the bands that year.
Yeah, that's strange. So I went back in preparation for this interview, and I listened to the album again with good headphones several times to really soak it back in, and I forgot how good that album was. And one of my comments is, you've made a great album, you've made a solid album when there are 3 songs that are not singles that are 3 of my favorite on the album. Like you could have had 3 more singles on top of that. So I'm curious if you ever considered the following 3 songs, if they were ever in consideration to be a single. So a little bit less, Getaway, which is my absolute favorite song on that album, and This Evening. Were any of those 3 ever maybe going to be in the first 3 singles?
Well, let's see. A little bit less was the last song we wrote for the record. We recorded it with Garth, and it had a totally different intro and pre-chorus. And Garth was sort of like, it's not really happening. Like, I don't know what to tell you guys, but this is your record. It's not mine. If I want to make my record, I'll just go make my record. So if you guys are really passionate about it, you can keep it. So we ended up compromising and taking part of what we were doing before and mixing it with some ideas that Garth and Ben Kaplan had. And that song was in contention to be a single at one point in time. But I think we were really married to some of the other songs because they had been around longer. Tell Me, I think, was the second last song written before the record, but it felt so immediate, and, Mike wrote all the songs, and, collectively we worked on arrangement and stuff like that, but he was the primary songwriter, and he felt really strongly about putting that out first, and we all agreed. Getaway, Mike wrote with Gavin Brown, and Simon Wilcox helped with the lyrics.
Wow.
And then brought it to us, and it was essentially done. We made changes to the bridge, was the only changes that we made in the song after they had worked on it, which was, I had suggested we do double stops, versus just kind of crew paddling through. And everybody kind of looked at me sort of sideways and like, all right, let's try it. And then it worked out, and people were pretty happy. I think
the chorus in Getaway is so good, man. I love that chorus.
I think looking back, I don't think it ever entered the conversation, but I think it would have probably been all right.
Yeah. If the album went like triple platinum and you
that would be
had
like
to put out single
one,
number 4, single 5, eventually we would have got to.
Yeah, that would have been like the 5th one, or the one that was just a video or something.
Yeah.
This Evening was actually a throwaway from the first Idle Sons record. It wasn't going to make it on to the second Idle Sons record, which was also the first Idle Sons record. It was from the Atlantic record. And I don't think any of us were like super partial to it. But again, it was one that I think Ryan really fought for. And he was like, no, I think it's more diverse. It does something that nothing else on the record does. Which it had this nice, really woody acoustic guitar creating all this motion in the background in the verses. I think it might be, there's only 2 songs, I think, on the whole record that have acoustic guitar on it. And that's one of them. And that's one of the oldest songs that we had brought to the Atlantic record. And it kind of just kept hanging around. And that's another one, like, it got reworked and reworked and reworked and reworked. And it's got a great bridge. The bridge ended up being really great in it. And that was something that we worked through with Gavin McKillop on the Atlantic record. We did like a month of pre-pro on the first go around, and literally like deconstructed every song. And that was one where he was like, you need a better bridge, come up with something better. And, we all stick our heads together and like, well, what if we tried this or that, or what if we did this? And it ended up being kind of like a sleeper, where it was like, I think it's one of the better sounding songs on the record. But it's definitely wasn't one that we would have considered to be a single.
So earlier you mentioned that, Idle Sons had a great singer and a great guitarist and a great drummer. Well, listening to the album, your bass is one of the highlights for me. And there's a couple songs like Now Forever and Waiting Around. To me, the bass really stands out with these tasty and memorable riffs. So I have a question for kind of the more tech type listeners to this podcast. Yeah. Can you share maybe the equipment you use to get your signature bass sound in Idle Sons? So maybe your choice of what bass, if there's any pedals, amp, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm pretty much a purist. We were very fortunate. Again, it's that in that day and age and at that time, making the Atlantic record, our producer Gavin McKillop was friends with a very, very nice Scottish session musician by the name of Graham Edwards, who goes by the professional name of The Matrix. He produced all the first Avril Lavigne record, and he came by one day with a 58P bass, an Ernie Ball Music Man Stingray 5, and a 1972 Ampeg SVT head, and said, hey, why don't you try these? And it's sort of like, for me as a bass player, like the Ampeg SVT is like the sound of rock and roll. It, for me, it just does everything that I want it to do. Signal chain wise, I was straight into the Ampeg, out of 810. And then I also had a B15 flip top with a single 15 kind of side chain that got kind of used every now and then. And then for compression, it was a genuine 70s Yuri 1176 compressor on the console side, making it sound like I knew what I was doing. And then for the Idle Sons, the record we did with Garth, it was my SVT that I got in New York from there was this great music store in New York City called Alto Music. I got my P bass there, I got my SVT there, and I got my Ernie Ball there. As soon as I made the first record with those three things, I was like, I have to have them. You know, I had like all kinds of different cabinets and amps, some good, some bad. I had dozens of different basses. But, you know, to me, every bass player, electric bass player, should have a Fender Precision bass. Even if you don't play it live, you just need to have one, because you need to know what it's like to record with one. Because you have to, you know, it's so responsive, and if you dig in too hard, it sounds clacky and out of tune. But if you play too soft, it sounds dull and weak. You really got to try to find how it works for you. And, you know, that growl, once it's going, it's hard to beat as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, the record with Garth was my SVT into an 8x10. And then a couple of songs we used a Mesa Boogie 400 Plus, which sadly is no longer available, which is sort of their version of the SVT circuit, into a 4x12 for something with a little more grind. And that was it for me.
So we're coming to the end of the Idle Sons section here, and then we'll dive into what you've been up to for the last 15 years or so, I guess. So
it's funny how time passes.
Yeah, it's crazy. So Idle Sons, on March 9th, 2007, the band announces its dissolution. So I have one final question, and then we have a fan question from an Idle Sons fan.
We have a fan.
We do. We have a fan question. Is it? It might be. So my question is, kind of looking back now that it's been, say, 15 years.
Yeah.
What would you say was your favorite part of being in Idle Sons? Or is there one memory that really stands out as kind of the happiest memory you can think of with the band?
That's a good question. It's a tough question. It's different now looking back, like, you know, like 10 plus years on. It's like you kind of have rose-colored glasses. There were a lot of things that were happening at the time where it didn't feel very awesome, that now you look back and you're just like, well, you know, it is what it is, or whatever. Obviously the record coming out and actually getting the record out was a huge moment for all of us. Touring, we did a lot of touring in a very short period of time. Ralph James and a very lovely gentleman who is sadly no longer with us by the name of Paul Gorley were our agents at that point in time. And Ralph took us into the office and said, like, I'm going to make you tour so much, you're going to call me and ask to stop. And that's exactly what happened. We did, I think, 117 shows in like 7 months.
Jeez.
Only in Canada, in a van and trailer. The four of us and like one or two crew guys. You know, usually like we had a buddy who'd be like, oh, you know, I can take a couple of weeks off. I'll come on tour and lug boxes. You know, we had a real tour manager. First it was John Watt, then it was Sean Palmer, and lastly it was Liam Colleen, who now is a manager at Coalition Entertainment himself. Sean Palmer mixes the Used and Bayside, and unfortunately John Watt has also passed away, but he obviously worked with us at Metalworks. Yeah, the touring was fun. We got to tour with a lot of really great bands and meet a lot of people. And, you know, since we're segueing into the next phase of my existence, a lot of the people I work with now, I met back then. You know, like Adam from 3 Days Grace and Saint Asonia. We toured with 3 Days Grace a ton. Obviously, Rick, Jay, Sean, Rich, Steve Moe later. And Figure 11 and Scott, Dave Renner and Dean Back from Theory of a Dead Man. I met those guys on tour. I met Ian Thornley when the first Thornley record came out. We had the same agent, and we toured quite extensively with them in Canada. Although it didn't really come out between the two of us till maybe like 2 years into me working with them that we had met before. It was one of those things where, like, I think I remembered it as a major milestone, but it probably was just some other day in the life for him at the time. So, a lot of the people that I work with now, I met back then. And a lot of those friendships were forged out of that work that we put in. And, we had a reputation as, a really hard working band. And we prided ourselves on it so much that we would do any show. And that was because we had heard from Paul Gorley that the Trews would play anywhere. And we were like, well, if the Trews will play anywhere, so will we. And it was like 20 years later, I talked to Colin McDonald about it, and he was like, yeah, he was like, that almost killed us. I was like, well, it did kill us, so I get it.
How crazy is it that they're still on the road, like touring all the time?
I think,
and still putting out albums and still having success.
Yeah, for people, there's a lot of it becomes a way of life, of course, and a lot of those bands from that era, the early 2000s, late 90s, were able to build audiences in that Much Music, MTV, terrestrial radio era where you could reach such a broad amount of people at once. Where now, like if you are in a band and you put out a record, like you're up against every record that's ever been released. I can click a button on my laptop right now and listen to the masters, of the first Queen album I can listen to vocal outtakes of A Night at the Opera, like how are you supposed to compete against that? And those bands were able to create longevity because they were able to reach such a broad audience so quickly back then, where it's so much harder to do that now. So when you see bands that are out there grinding it out and having success, like Glorious Sons or, the Dirty Nil is a great example. I love those guys. They work so hard. And it's like, man, if you guys came out in 2004, you probably would have had a major label album and you would have had a video on Much Music. And, you can't even do either of those things anymore.
Yeah, times are changing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask how you ended up after Idle Sons in more of the roles that you have now. Yeah. So that transition, but the fan question that might or might not be your mom. So no, this is from Mark Skinner.
Okay.
So Mark Skinner asks, is there even a remote possibility of a 20th anniversary Hell or High Water / 16 Seasons reunion show? And then he's like creating it. He's saying a one-off, like possibly at the Sound of Music Festival in Burlington, just planting seeds. So that's from Mark Skinner. He's allowed to dream,
Yeah. I would say, like you never say never.
Hey, if there's $1 million offer from Sound of Music because they want their hometown boys, maybe you'd play a few songs.
I think it wouldn't be about money. I'd like to think it wouldn't be about money because it's been offered before. I think it would have to be about 4 people mending some personal relationships, being in a band, especially a touring band, especially one that isn't extremely successful, fighting tooth and nail. It's like being married to 4 people at the same time. You share each other's triumphs, you wallow in each other's suffering, and you learn how to inflict great pain amongst each other for sometimes the most trivial of things. And that's really, kind of in a nutshell what happened was we stopped being a gang of friends, sort of, and really we forgot how to communicate with each other. And we really did kind of lose sight of the fact that, like, we're all friends, right? Like, this is something we do because it's fun, right? And that was the hardest part. It was the hardest part about quitting. I was kind of the second one. Sean left a tour before me and was replaced by a very affable, incredibly talented young guitar player. His name is Brendan Mowat Smith. He's still a really huge, great guitar player. He's got a YouTube channel where he's an incredible player. And we really ran him through the ringer, man. Like, he didn't have a chance. We were so bad to him, collectively. At least I feel that way. Maybe everybody else doesn't. I hope in my heart amongst hearts that he can look back at it and be like, no, it was a blast. Yeah, you guys left me at a truck stop and you tried to make me cry that one time. But, walking away from it was hard. It was hard. It was really hard. I kind of sat on the couch for a little while going like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm too old to start another band. I was 28 at the time, or 29.
Just a young pup now.
Yeah, just a young pup. I would think I was 28 or 29. And, it was one of those things where I got a phone call from Julian Gruel, who was our manager for Idle Sons. And, we had to go through the whole dissolving. The thing that they'll tell you about when a band breaks up is like dissolving the apparatus behind it. It takes so much work. It's almost not worth breaking up.
It's like a marriage where people just stay together even though they're not together anymore.
In spite of each other, because like there's all these capital assets you have to get rid of, equipment. We had vans and trailers and insurance policies and lawyers and, excess inventory, and we owed EMI like 10 grand, and we owed the bank money, and we owed everybody money. And, like trying to get everybody together and go like, okay, I know we all hate each other right now, but we need to end this with everybody the right way. And we did. We were able to talk amongst ourselves via email or surrogates or whatever it took at the time, and sell off our assets and pay off every single person we owed money to, which was like about 75 grand at the end of the day. And, there were a lot of "you'll never work in this town agains" while talking to people over the phone and going like, hey, like, I don't have all of your 20 grand, but I got 18.5 of it. What do you say? And Julian had called me up and been like, and said, look, there's an opportunity, if you ever thought of, working on the other side of the fence. Finger 11 is launching a new record called Them Versus You Versus Me, and we're doing a tie-in with Much Music. And they're going to send 5 contest winners across the country in an RV to report live from the show every night. After they're done doing these reports, they're going to work for Wind Up Records and create content for the Finger 11 Street Team. What do you think about going out and shepherding these kids along? And, maybe while you're out there, you'll decide whether you like the idea of working with bands as opposed to in them. And, if you pay close attention to the guys on the Finger 11 crew, you might learn something or else. So I was like, yeah, I literally have absolutely nothing to do, So I hugged my wife and said, I'm going back on the road. She said, you're doing what now? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna chaperone contest winners and drive an RV across Canada. And, the nice thing about being in a van and trailer band for 15 years is you get really good at driving across Canada. So they hooked me up with Ron Morse, Jamie Appleby, and Jared Goldberg, who were at Wind Up Records Canadian division at the time. And they handed over the keys to a brand new GMC RV that had been wrapped with the Finger 11 artwork and another band called Strata, who was the other band on the tour. And we piled the 5 kids in there and off we went. I think the second day I scratched the paint off the side of the RV, and the third day one of the girls got her purse stolen. But after that, it was pretty smooth sailing. And
besides those 2 things, it was all smooth.
Besides those 2 things, I brought the kids back, and everyone had tattoos. So there were probably people who weren't super impressed.
Chaperone of the year, yeah, chaperone.
Yeah, and it was awesome in a way, and it really kind of set the tone for me. Is seeing these kids who had, these kids, they're in their 20s. I'm like 4 years older than them. Like, they're not kids, but I refer to them as kids. Seeing these kids that had never been out on tour before and kind of taking them on tour and letting them experience all of the things that happen on tour, which is, never ending drives and long nights and no sleep and crap food and, giggling hilariously at things that don't make sense because you're delirious, and all of the other fun things that happen, the after show and the camaraderie and the sense of achievement when you get home after your first time out, across the country, like, we did it. And it really was like, yeah, I had a lot of long talks with a guy named Wade Butland, who was Finger 11's front of house engineer at the time. and Kevin Nicol, who was their tour manager, about the ins and outs. And I bonded a lot with a guy who was my friend until his death, Alan Riches, who was Rick's tech at the time, about that side of the gig. And, you know, I remember talking with Wade and saying, like, ask yourself this question. Even though you're not playing the music, do you still like the work? And I was like, I think I do. I think I do like the work. Yeah. I think I could do this. I'm going to be a tour manager, I said to myself out loud at some point. And I think Kevin Nicol heard me and started laughing and said, be careful what you wish for. By the way, go run this meet and greet for me. So I went out and we did that tour, and it ended. And there was talk of me maybe staying on to assist, but they didn't have budget and I didn't have an American work visa. But Rob Lanning reached out and said, hey, we've got this singer-songwriter, acoustic R&B singer. He's 17. His name is Justin Nozuka. He just put out a record called Holly. We got him a deal in the UK, and it's starting to take off. Do you think you would be interested? He's like, it's only going to be maybe a couple of weekends here and there. I can't really guarantee it's going to be much. That ended up being like 3 years and like 3 times around the world we took that. And it was another one. Like, I can't thank, you know, the guys at Coalition and Davey and everyone in that office and Justin and his family for giving me that opportunity. I would have never expected to be on my 29th birthday being in a band that's falling apart, and on my 30th birthday sitting in a production office in Utrecht, Netherlands, running a show for a 17-year-old kid who's got a runaway success of a record. And, you know, watching him go through that whole process that I went through, but seeing him have success and seeing him being able to just absorb it and keep going and not have it change who he was as a person. And we did a lot of miles, man. Me and the guys in that band. Mark Pellitzer, who's in the band Magic now, was Justin's guitar player and keyboard player. Al Stanisichuk was the drummer, and Anthony Lavdansky was the bass player. All college-level educated musicians, incredible players. And, you know, we built a really great little crew around this band. Ryan Haynes was my production manager and front of house engineer. Brendan Horn was a lovely guy from London, Ontario, lighting guy. And our merch guy was Anthony's childhood friend from the Bronx. Anthony was from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, but went to the university in Toronto. But his buddy, little Nicky Cambiotti, was our merch guy, and he was everything you wanted him to be. You know, he's this little New Yorker with a huge blowout hair and always, you know, making moves. And we took that, we ran that for a long time, man. And it was wild to go from 0 back to 100 in the span of like a few months.
Yeah, you'd consider that probably your first big break behind the scenes.
Yeah, on that side of the fence, it was, you know, and it wasn't just the work. It was like, you know, he was really poised for some major success, you know, like we did all the shows, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, David Letterman. I got to meet David Letterman. I got to scare the crap out of Paul, his musical director, because I had joked about it and been like, hey, I've been on your street. And he looked at me. He's like, what did you say? I was like, yeah, there's a street named after you in Thunder Bay. He's like, oh yeah, that's really funny. I was like, okay, so I shouldn't talk to people.
That's where the Junos happened as well, where I saw you with Justin Nozuka.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so there was Junos in there, and I was such a fan of Justin Nozuka and that album Holly that for that Christmas I bought 5 copies of Holly and I put it in the stockings of every family member of mine. That's how much I love that album. And
the guy who produced that record, a gentleman named Bill Bell, is just a fantastic. He plays guitar for Jason Mraz and a few other people, and he makes great records. And what he was able to capture, you know, was just literally unbridled passion. And that was the thing about Justin. Like, if he was going to go out there to sing, he was going to give you 150% day in, day out, you know, like he was just so game to do it on Holly, to get out there. And, you know, there was a night we were on a US run, and I think we were on our 18th show in a row. And I kind of pulled him aside, was like, "Are you okay? Like, are you all right with this? Like, we're pushing you pretty hard here, man. Like, we're doing 21 shows in 24 days, and then we're flying somewhere to do talk show, whatever. Like, are you cool?" And he was like, "Yeah, man, like, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to give it the try." And, the kid worked so hard, and the band guys, because out of the gate, man, like, we made tons of mistakes as a crew. The band didn't. They were always spot on, but I screwed up all kinds of stuff. The first time you go to Switzerland, you're like, I have to do what now? Like, the first
You're
time
in
you
charge
go
of
here,
like the directions and travel and flight.
yeah, like, and it was this thing, like, Eric and Rob were just willing to give me a chance, and Justin was willing to give me a chance and just say, "All right, man, like, I think we can do it." The first time I went to the UK, we had a British front of house engineer, Larry Hibbett, who's now a really successful record producer. And that was the only time we went out of there, when we went over outside of Canada without all Canadian or American crew guys. And, the second time we went over, it was me and Ryan Haynes, who was our front of house engineer. And the first thing we had to do was split up. And I went to Austria with the band, and I went to Austria with like Justin and Mark, and he went to the United Kingdom with the rest of the band guys. And then we met back up. And the first thing we had to do once the group was back together was take the overnight ferry from Dartford, England to Hook of Holland. And we got off the ferry in the Hook of Holland. I turned on the GPS and it didn't work because it was a UK only GPS in our little van. And it was like, okay, what do we do? No Google Maps on your phone, no iPhone, and we literally randomly drove around until I found a car dealership where somebody spoke English. And they said, "Oh, well, there's a media market right here," like, which is their version of like Future Shop. And I bought a Dutch GPS that worked for all of Europe, and off we went.
Man, you must be, when you just go on vacation, like with your wife, you must be so excited to just like get one, regular plane to one place. It must be nice to keep it simple at some point.
Yeah. I mean, you can't do the tour managing and crew side of it if you don't like, I guess what you would call aggressive travel, where you're moving, you're always moving, you're never not moving. If you don't like that, it's just not something you can do. You could be a great manager, you could be a great producer, but if you can't travel, you can't tour. And now so much of the business and the industry and people's livelihoods depends on it. It's like, when I was in a band, you went on tour to make money so you could sell a record, and now if you're in a band, you make a record so you can go on tour to make money. It's like almost like 180 degrees. I mean, that's a personal opinion, of course, but that's the way I feel about it.
So the four roles that come up for the work that you've done are mostly stage manager, tour manager, guitar tech, backline tech. For our listeners, that if they're not super musical or don't really know the behind the scenes technical stuff, can you just give a quick breakdown of those four roles so they know what they are when we talk about them and moving forward?
If you imagine a band and crew being like an army, a tour manager is like a general. The buck stops with you. Everything is your fault. You work the budgets with management and the agents, you work the routing out, you book hotels, you book all the flights, you settle the shows, you deal with the promoters, you help with marketing, you're really boots on the ground, and you're the point of contact for everyone. If the label needs to talk to the artist, they call the tour manager. If the management needs to talk to the artist, they call the tour manager. Like if the accountant or the business manager needs to talk to the artist, they call the tour manager. Everything is your fault, and the buck stops with you. And as a big fat loudmouth know-it-all, I was great for a while, but there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure. As the artists get bigger and the budgets get bigger, and you go from a van to a van trailer to a bus to now you've got a bus and a truck, and now you've got multiple buses and multiple trucks. You know, the weight of the responsibility can feel heavier. There are guys out there that can handle it like water off a duck's back. Like the tour manager I work under at Theory, Andy DeVoe, is like, he just handle anything, man. Like, it's like, he's so smart, it's scary. You know, he's a world-class front of house engineer, but he's also like just an expert level logistics planner. You know, so much of the tour managing phase is logistics. You know, stage manager, if you can imagine the show as a ship, the stage manager keeps the ship from stinking. So he keeps the show on time. He makes sure that the crew calls are correct, that, you know, your local labor is where it's supposed to be. You know, he's the one who's going to advance, you know, your audio production and your lighting and make sure, do we need a barricade? You know, is the guy who's going to sort all that stuff out for you is the stage manager and production manager. The stage manager is, you know, basically he runs the show. He keeps the show on time. He makes sure that people are where they need to be when they need to be there. Backline tech is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of equipment technicians. You know, a backline tech is the guy who could fix your guitar, but also maybe program your keyboard for you. Or, you know, so most of the guys, especially in Canada, most of the guys that are guitar techs are also backline techs, you know, like up here, it's really not enough to just be able to fix guitars. You know, you have to be able to set up a drum set and fix drums and, you know, program a keyboard or, you know, maybe tune a lap steel or, you know, and fix an amplifier. You know, you have to be able to do kind of a little bit of everything. And then the guitar tech is just a more specialized version of that, where, you know, you're really focusing in on guitars, amplifiers, and effects pedals, and everything that deals with things with strings, as we would say.
So your background playing drums, guitar, bass, all that must help when you're the backline tech.
Yeah, very much so. Because, you know, I know enough to get myself in trouble on all instruments. You know, I can't really hammer anything out on a piano, but my wife plays, and she's really good. But I've been harassing her to teach me a Taylor Swift song or something on piano so I can impress people at soundcheck someday. Yeah, that's a big part of it is, you know, having that experience. And most of the techs I know are phenomenal players. Almost every guitar tech I know is a great player. I mean, same with front of house guys like Dan Preston, killer guitar player, you know. Andy DeVoe, who's our front of house guy at Theory, you know, college educated drummer. Most of the guys out there, Wade Butland, who did the front of house for Finger 11, all those back then, also same thing, you know, highly educated drummer. Most of the guys out there play something. And then you kind of end up here either by will or by circumstance. And yeah, they're tools that come in handy.
When I was talking with Dan, we were mentioning that a lot of times the tech, so the guitar tech or the drum tech or the backline tech, when a band loses a member, a lot of times it's that guy that jumps in because, like you just mentioned, they're insanely talented at that instrument. They already know that they get along with the band. They're a part of the crew. They know the songs inside out. So you see it a lot. So Stained, you know, their drum tech becomes a drummer. At one point, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, their guitar tech became the guitarist for like one album, and then Frusciante's back. You see it a lot. Yeah.
It happens.
Actually, sorry, Dan with Clark Nova was more on the audio side and became the guitarist, right? So
yeah, it happens. It's never really came my way. There's been one or two times where they're like, listen, you know, like so-and-so's not feeling so hot. Like, do you think you could jump in and do 2 or 3 songs? But it hasn't happened often for me. But yeah, you see it a lot. You know, and in some bands, yeah, there are guys working for the bands that are just so incredibly talented.
As we move through your, you know, I guess your biography or your resume, we I don't know, you know, how to say it professionally here, but we have a honeymoon suite for 2008 to 2009. So tour manager, backline tech. And then Finger 11 tour manager, backline tech from 2010 to 2017. So a long time there. So, I mean, those two bands are completely different music, different sound. Does the genre or the sound of the band, the type of music, does that have anything to do with, does it change anything when it comes to tour managing or backline tech?
On the tour managing side, it can, because the fans are different. You know, so like when you're working for a band that's, you know, loud, hard rock, aggressive, you're looking at, you know, a crowd that's going to be equally in kind, you know, people who are going to be, you know, there's going to be moshing and stage diving and slam dancing. And so, yeah, when you're advancing shows, you know, you're thinking more about security and, you know, okay, what kind of barricade are we going to have? We have to have a barricade, you know, well, what is it going to be like, you know, dealing with people after the show? Is it going to be easy to clear the room? You know, where when you're working in pop, you know, the questions become slightly different, but in some ways similar. Because, okay, you know, like with Justin, when it was really rocking and rolling in Europe and stuff, he was a pop star. You know, he had 2 gold records over there. You know, he had 4 #1 singles in France, and people would, you know, line up outside of the hotel and sing all night long, hoping to get his attention. And, you know, and he's such a sweet, nice, innocent guy. He'd go out and hang out with just a bunch of strangers, you know, and you'd have to take that into account. You know, like, where are we staying? Okay, what's the neighborhood like? What are, you know, how many people do you think are going to show up there? You know, with pop music, you know, worry as well, especially in Europe, like counterfeiters, you know, because like bootlegging T-shirts and posters in France, for example, is not illegal as long as you're like not on the property or something. So you have to worry about that, and you have to worry about, you know, is my artist going to get mobbed? You know, if he's a young, handsome gentleman, or a bunch of crazed fans going to assault him because of his dashing good looks. If it's a hard rock band, is some guy going to show up in an alley with a broken beer bottle and try and stab him? You know, you never know. I mean, I'm kind of focusing on security for some reason, which is not my strong suit, but, you know, so yeah, there are things you would approach differently. For me and almost everyone I know that works in this industry, the genre doesn't matter in terms of appreciation. You know, I can get behind a great R&B lick just as much as I can get behind the last Gojira album. Like, great music is great music, you know, and even music that maybe isn't in your wheelhouse, you find the ability, especially when you're hearing it night after night, to find those moments within the songs where you're like, yeah, okay, I see what's going on here. I can get behind that. And that's really a key. You don't want to go work for a band you don't like, and you don't want to work for people you can't get along with.
So someone that you can get along with. I have a quote here from Rich Bedeau, who you know from you know, Finger 11 and from Saint Asonia. So he has a long quote. He always provides long, thoughtful quotes. So this is Rich.
He's a surprisingly thoughtful, caring, honest guy.
Introspective guy, yes. He says, I've known Bruce since the very beginning of his band, Slurpee Mondays, and then Idle Sons. We took them on the road with us in the States and Canada, and we all had a blast. Bruce is a great bass player, and then made the switch to guitar tech, then tour manager, I believe. There's a reason why his career has flourished over the years. He works hard. He's a man of his word. He's trustworthy, and his heart is massive and beautiful. Bruce is a family man who stands strong beside his wonderful wife through the trials and tribulations they have faced together. And I really love you, Bruce. I'm so very proud of you, brother. So that's Rich, Finger 11.
Rich is he's such a sweet guy, man. You know, we went a lot of miles together, you know, in the Idle Sons days, and then with me working with the band. And it was something that was a concern when I came into the camp as a tour manager, was, will the guys take you seriously? And I remember having this long, kind of drawn out, semi-arduous, partially hilarious conversation with Rick about it. And Rick going like, I'm going to be a real dick to you, you know, like, you're not going to like me. I'm like, no, that's just your opinion, man. Like, I'm sure we can, you know, we can figure this out, you know. Like, I always felt with those guys, like, kind of like I owed them, and it was only right for me to go and do my best to work for them. And, you know, Rich had always gone to bat for me, especially with the other guys. And, you know, I'm so happy to see that he's made so many crazy strides with his life, and he's got a wife and kids now, and he's playing with Chris Daughtry every now and again, and he's still doing great stuff, and he's such a colorful, artistic, interesting guy, and I'm just happy that he's doing well, and it's an honor for him to say something so nice about me. It's an honor for anybody to say anything nice about me.
The longest interview I've ever done on this podcast, I did 3.5 hours with Rich. And I still think, 70 plus interviews in, it's the best interview I've ever done, because he was so honest about the highs and lows, about, about the grip of drugs and alcohol and coming clean and being in a great place now. Like, he was just so open and honest that during the pandemic here, where people are, isolated and mental health issues and turning to drugs and there's suicide. It's like a message that had to come out at that time. And I feel like it really helped a lot of people, myself included. So his episode was one of the best.
Well, I've heard a couple of different podcasts with him as well as yours. And, for him to kind of wear his heart on his sleeve and just come out honestly and tell his story. And, I was there for quite a few years of it. And, for him to come out and say, like, I did things that I'm not proud of. I made mistakes, I had these problems. And for him to just go out and honestly own it all is massive. I don't know. I don't think I would be able to do it.
Especially sometimes in the music industry, and especially if you're in a band that's a bit heavier, it's like there's so much ego and pride that it's you're a wuss if you're honest, or if you show emotion or remorse or any of those things. So I think it makes it even harder for him to do the things that he's done.
Yeah, I agree.
So after that, man, these names: Matthew Good, guitar and backline tech, stage manager. So this is 2011 to 2014, and then again in 2016, and then in 2018. So I have a quote from Matthew Good to end all quotes. Like, I want this on my tombstone if he was talking about me. Matthew Good says, "He's the best, period." That's what he gave me. That's like the ultimate, to the point, like, most solid quote ever. He's the best, period. Matthew Good. There you go.
Matt's, I would have a hard time not standing behind Matt Good. I know there's been some stuff in the press and some stuff that I'm sure he's not super proud of having done or been through. That guy's got a solid gold heart at the end of the day. We had a great working relationship. I'm never really going to be able to speak to you about what guys' private lives are like, because it's always something I've always tried to stay out of, and I've tried to keep it light, keep it within, the scope of the business and what we need to be doing. And, I've seen that guy stand up for people and do things for people that, I don't think many people would. We were in Oshawa playing at he was playing at the Regent Theater, and this was on the first record that I worked with him. And we had a keyboard player, a fellow by the name of Anthony Wright, who's an amazing, talented, unbelievable musician. I think he's from Virginia. He's an African-American organist, keyboard player, saxophonist from Virginia. And we were doing a load-in Oshawa, and they have, there's usually like a little catering spread with like sandwiches or whatnot. And, Tony rolled off the bus and grabbed a sandwich, which he has every right to do. And some dude starts chirping at him, and making some pretty obvious racial remarks. And, Anthony is a big-hearted, soft guy who's full of class. And, he's probably lived his whole life dealing with that kind of stuff. So, he kind of shrugged his shoulders and just went back to the bus and went back to sleep. Matt caught wind of it and absolutely freaked out. Came steaming into the venue, stopped the whole load in, stopped everything, and went up one side and down of the entire local crew. Said, "I don't care which one of you it was. The fact that any one of you people let this happen is enough. If anybody says anything like that again, pardon my language, I'll kick the shit out of every fucking one of you. And he's actually a pretty big guy. Like, you know what I mean? And, you know, like, that's a guy you want to work with, a guy who's going to who has your back. You know, it's unfortunate for him that, you know, parts of his private life have come out, and, you know, I'm sure he doesn't feel great about some of the things that have happened. And, you know, that's not my place to say. But professionally speaking, a great guy to work with.
Yeah, this is at least, I don't know, at least 12 years ago. So at some point earlier on during his solo career, I saw him in Montreal, and I think it was at the Metropolis, and he was amazing, man. He was so good, man. His discography, like between the Matthew Good Band and Matthew Good, there's a ton of albums there. There's so many great songs, and man, he's a true Canadian talent there.
Yeah, and you know, his work advocating and personally suffering from a lot of mental illness. You know, he got a bad rap for a lot of years in, you know, in the crew community because he could be difficult to work with, and, you know, whatever people say in those situations. But he was, you know, severely bipolar at the time, you know, with a really bad lung condition out there, you know, undiagnosed, unmedicated. And, you know, after he had his mental breakdown, he put out that record Hospital Music. And, you know, my friends that worked for him in the old days, you know, they tell completely different stories. But my time with him, you know, above the board, he was a great guy to work for.
So after that, we move on to Big Rec. So guitar and backline tech, stage manager. So 2011, there's long stints with some of these bands. So 2011 to 2016, and then again in 2020, and then in 2021 and in 2022. There's a whole pandemic in there as well.
Yeah, so there's a whole pandemic in there.
I recently had their new drummer Sekou on the podcast.
Yeah,
and
that
was a great episode, man. That guy's played with everyone. It's so cool to see him now as a full-time drummer with Big Rec, and he couldn't be happier, you know, being kind of a hired gun on the road his whole life, and now being a part of an amazing multi-platinum band where he has a say in the writing of the music and he's on the albums. So it's awesome to see him there.
Yeah, Big Rec is another one of those like super serendipitous, I don't know how I'm here, but I'm here kind of things. Goes back to the Idle Sons days again. There was Trevor Hurst from Econoline Crush put out a solo record that he made with Ross from Collective Soul. In his touring band was this fella from Winnipeg by the name of Paulo Netta. I met Paulo Netta, and I guess around 2003, he was playing bass for Trevor Hurst. And it was one of those friendships where it was like, hey, my name is Bruce. You know, like, oh, hey, I'm Paulo. Are we best friends? Yes. And we stayed buddies, and we were always buddies. He went to work for Ian as Ian's tech for a few years in the Thornley days, and then he became a member of Thornley, and then he became a member of Big Rec. So fast forward to about 2011, they're working on putting out the next Ian Thornley record. It hadn't officially become Big Rec again yet. It was going to be Ian Thornley or something else, but they were short a guitar tech for a couple of summer festival dates. And I had been working with Finger 11, and we had some time off. And Liam Colleen, who was in Not By Choice, another drummer who became a tour manager, who's now an artist manager, he called me up, and he was our last tour manager in the Idle Sons days. And he was like, hey, I know you're guitar teching for Finger 11. Do you think you'd come sub in on a couple of Thornley shows? And, you know, like, as I quietly bit my tongue and turned purple from, you know, childish glee, because, you know, like, Ian is an icon, and, you know, I was
a guitarist,
huge Big Rec fan, massive Big Rec fan. And, you know, quietly kind of like struggled to say like, yeah, okay. You know, he's like, okay, cool. You know, I need you to meet me after lockup, and we're going to load up the gear and set up the rehearsals. So we went down, and I did that, and I went and I covered for 2 shows, and I did okay. You know, got through it. You know, El Apollo was such a huge help because he's, you know, not just a great guitar player, but a super talented technician. And he really showed me the ropes of what was going on. And it's a pretty involved gig. Like, I was taking care of Ian and Brian on those shows.
And I did a couple, and kind of met Ian kind of quietly after shows, and just went like, okay, like quietly kind of talking. What do you need? What are you looking for? What do you want to do for this or that? Business stuff, and not really any personal stuff. And we got through the 3 shows, and it was okay. It was pretty good. And then I kind of put it out of my head, and I didn't hear from anybody in that camp for another year. And then they're big wreck again, and I get a phone call from their manager, Andy Curran, and he says, we're looking for a guy for Big Wreck. Ian thought you did a pretty good job when you covered those 3 shows. Do you want to come do this Albatross tour? There's a new single coming out next week. We need you to come in to do some pre-production, and we've got a bunch of press. Would you like to come do it? And I was like, okay, sure, I'll give it a try. I was like, man, I'm gonna fail so miserably. This is gonna be brutal. But Paulo kept kind of tripping in my ear. He's like, oh, you got this, buddy. You got this. You're gonna kill it. You're gonna kill it. So we go to rehearsals, and he had a new rig put together by a guy, and it didn't work. It just was a complete disaster. And I'm like, I'm going to get fired before this fucking tour even leaves. Okay, so you dig in, and you do your best to problem solve. We limp through it. We limp through the first couple of shows, not without a pretty large amount of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of yelling and screaming at inanimate objects. Why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening now? And I was able to place a call through Andy Curran to a guy, Mike Vegas from Nice Rack. And he was able to walk me through a lot of the problems. And we ended up flying the rig from Vancouver to Toronto. And he did like an overnight session and rebuilt the rig for me. And then walked me through every inch of it. Because the guy that had built the rig originally, I'd call and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this. And he wouldn't call me back. And you're stuck. I mean, this is, arguably the most guitar-oriented band in the country. And Ian's no problem. Okay. You give him, a ukulele, a dime, and an elastic band, and he'll still make it sound like the best thing you've ever heard. But, my job is to make sure this stuff works, and it's not working. And, and there's no way you can't excuse it, like you got to fix it. You have to fix it. That's the end of the story. You got to fix it. And so we were able to get it fixed, and then it became fun. And I survived that first tour, and he kind of took me aside. He's like, you're my guy now, right? And I think he turned away, and when he did, I quickly let out like a single tear. But
the greatest moment of my life.
It was a very happy, it was a really happy moment for me because, I've always felt like pretty much everyone I know could probably do it better. So for him to go out on a limb for me and say like, yeah, you're my guy was a really big moment for me. And as if you didn't think, a huge resume booster cachet thing, like the last few years, last 5-6 years, I've been with the Theory of a Dead Man guys, predominantly in the United States. And, when other people hear in other crews and other bands that I'm from Canada, the first question is, do I know who Ian Thornley is? And I get to kind of puff my chest out. And I worked with him for 4 years, and then all of a sudden I'm cool. He legitimizes me in the eyes of so many. And it's, I feel like it's undeserved because, there's this relationship you have when you're teching for a guy where you're kind of like, you're a bartender, you're a confidant, you're, a creative foil, you're someone to bounce ideas off of. You're sort of all things to all people, and you're a guy that pushes boxes. But, there's this relationship that kind of develops, and, it's funny because, like Ian would ask me, you think this sounds good? I'm like, why the hell do you want to know my opinion, dude? Like, you have the best ears on the planet, like, But, I'll always be so grateful for how patient both him and Brian were with me, and just the learning curve, you know, if you want to be a super nerd, you know, there's gear, and then there's that level of gear, which is, you know, 2-3 tiers up from, you know, what you might be using in your bar band or whatever, and learning how to deal with equipment like that, and learning real more specifics and fine points of the instruments, and, you know, and how to set things up. And he was such a great guy to work for in that learning curve, because he's so good at being able to verbalize what he needs an instrument to do. You know, some guys that hand you a guitar go, it doesn't feel right. Well, that's a pretty broad statement. Okay.
Yeah, where do I start?
Cool.
Here?
Where do we start? Well, it doesn't feel right. What, on your left hand, on your right hand? You know, is the action too high? Does it feel like there's too much relief? Are the frets too sharp? Like, talk to me, Goose. Like, is it the pickups? Is it the electronics? Where do we begin? But, you know, Ian and Brian were both guys that could come up and be like, could you just lower the G string, say about 0.5 millimeter, you know, or could you do this, or could you do that? And specific instruction on what makes the instrument feel good for them. And then that's when sort of, you know, the clouds part a little bit, and you go like, oh, okay, like maybe I am getting the hang of this, you know. And then you turn around and meet a guy like Nick Gagliardo at Nickified in Caledonia and learn that you know absolutely nothing about the instrument. But also very lucky in Canada, in the community, that there's like, amongst guitar and backline guys, like, we're all buddies. You know, Chris Draper, who did Rival Sons and Daniel Caesar and all these great bands, he's a bud. You know, like James Welsh, we did Big Wreck together for like 2.5 years. He's with The Offspring now. You know, Craig Pattison, who does Bryan Adams, is like a mentor to a lot of us. Jimmy Reed, who is not a guitar tech anymore, but a guitar player. He plays guitar with Sass Jordan, and he played with Matthew Good. He's how I got the Matthew Good gig. You know, another guy, like all these guys that I can lean on if I have a problem that I can't solve, where I can put it out there, you know. And it's neat now because there's a bunch of younger guys that I didn't know coming up, like Mike Raymond in Ottawa, and Cal McCormick, who's like this brilliant amp designer who also happens to be a roadie from time to time. And, you know, and on the other side, there's a guy, Jordan Gauthier, who owns YC Drums. He's like Canada's Mr. Drum Tech.
He's with Alexis on Fire a lot, right?
He's with Alexis, the Arkells, July Talk. If a band has a drummer, there's like a 40% chance that Jordan might be involved. He's like the hardest working guy, and he's such a bud. And it's the same thing. You got a problem with something to do with drums, you can call that guy and be like, hey, man, what do I do? And you know, these are people that I can call, and you get an answer, and you don't feel alone and like you're on an island, which can be the case sometimes.
I have some kind words here from someone that referred to you guys as road dogs. I think he said all the road dogs know each other. So this is from Ryan Bovaird, who's a concert technician and tour production manager for, maybe you've heard of these guys: Snoop Dogg, Judas Priest, Drake, Aerosmith, Billy Talent, just a few people. So this is what Ryan says. He says, Bruce is the man. Every time I've been on stage with him, he's been welcoming, accommodating, and super cool, even when the pressure's on. I'd help him out with anything in a second if he asked. When we cross paths again, the next round is on me. So that's from Ryan Bovaird.
He's a sweet guy, man. And that's the thing, like, there's sort of a tendency in jobs like this where competition brings out the worst in people. And there's only a handful of spots out there. I mean, to bookend what I was saying earlier, if you wanted to do it, now's the time, because it's so crazy busy. But, you know, like, we're kind of like just a bunch of dudes that like each other's company. And there's really not a technician in this country that I know that I wouldn't help out if he had a problem. And there's a tendency, maybe a little more in the US, for guys to be competitive. And, you know, you get guys talking about like, oh, I can't help you with that. That's a trade secret. It's like, cool, man. Well, this guy's going to tank. And it's cool that I might get fired for it, but he's still going to look bad. And if it gets back that you knew the answer and you wouldn't tell me, maybe you don't look so great either. You know, and it's the spirit of cooperation. I mean, you know, and it comes to us from the older guys like John Farnsworth and Lee Chomiak, who worked Blue Rodeo, who are, guys that have been at it for a long time and know everything about everything, and I can call Farnsey or Lee and be like, hey man, I got a problem. Can you help me? And the answer isn't going to be no.
Yeah.
I'm painting a pretty rosy picture here.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it, man. It's a family out there on the road. We have, man, there's so many artists that you've worked with here. So after Big Wreck, well, it's not after because you still work with Big Wreck, but we have Marianas Trench, Simple Plan, the Sheepdogs, the Tea Party, Sam Roberts Band, Theory of a Dead Man, Blue Rodeo, Tim Hicks. Like, it's crazy, man. We've already done almost 2.5 hours. So just, I guess, a few questions about some of those artists.
Yeah, of course.
We actually have a fan question here. So this is sent in from Simon Michaels. He says, wow, what a resume. Which artists have you worked with whose stage persona is very different from the person they are off stage? So the example I like to give, which gives you a little bit of time to think, is I saw Danko Jones at Ottawa at Barrymore's, and he's like on stage. He is a wild man, right? He's got the tongue out. It's rock and roll. And then I get off stage, he gets off stage, and I'm with him backstage, and he's just this little dude with these like little librarian glasses, like he was just very nice and soft spoken, and it's like wild man on stage, cool next door neighbor off stage. And it's like when he puts that foot on stage, he's now in the domain of Danko Jones, which is like a character he's created.
Yeah. That's kind of a tough one. Almost everyone I've worked for is pretty genuine. Josh and Marianas can play a bit of a character, but he's such an energetic, charismatic guy. Even when he's like chilling out, he's pretty energetic and charismatic. I can tell you guys that are every bit the character you think they are.
Okay.
I had the very lovely opportunity to sub in for the Tea Party on a tour, and Jeff Martin was everything I wanted him to be. One part wizard, one part sage, like one part wild man, everything he's cooked up to be, and a genuinely nice guy. He's either the greatest character actor of all time, or he truly is, the spirit of Jimmy Page and Aleister Crowley mixed with Jim Morrison and, a carnival barker. And, that's a guy who can command an audience, like really great at commanding an audience, where a lot of the guys I work with tend to be really genuine, like Tim Hicks.
Do you think it's because you're in the Canadian music industry mostly, and Canadians were known for being like nice and stuff, and
polite and reasonable, and I don't necessarily know if it's that. I think it's just probably like the luck of the draw. Max Kerman of the Arkells is another guy who's an incredible front man. Highly educated, super smart, down to earth guy. Great front man. I had the fortunate luck of being able to go out with Jordan on some of their first arena tour dates. Around when 11:11 and those songs were really hitting, and right when Knocking on the Door came out, and getting to see them experience that for their first time, headlining arenas, bringing in 5,000-6,000 people, it was great. And Max is a super genuine guy and a killer frontman.
I had their keyboard player, Anthony Carone, on for an episode. Great. And what's funny is you mentioned, is it Jordan that does all the drum stuff that you're talking about for the Arkells? So Anthony was talking about the rally, right, that they do in Hamilton, where there's like 27,000 people. And I saw Jordan post that he was out there setting up all the drums and everything. And it's, can you imagine, you look out, there's a stadium of 20,000+ people.
There are very few people in this country that work as hard as Jordan Gauthier. Another guy is a guy named George Toms, who's the stage manager for Marianas Trench. He's sort of like a rock and roll switchblade, Swiss Army knife. It's like, hey, George, we need you to tech guitars. And be like, well, okay, I'll figure it out. Hey, George, can you, do you know how to handle dry ice? Sure. Hey, George, the video server's down. Can you fix the video wall? Okay. The guy just will, goes to the wall for his bands and really, you know, like if he doesn't know how to do it, he'll learn, and he'll learn fast. It's scary. I remember I was out on a theory date. We were in Sturgis, and he called me, and he was subbing in guitar teching on Marianas, and he was having some problems with some wireless. He's like, I've never used this stuff before. What do I do? I was like, no problem, man. Like, we'll walk through it. You know, we'll get you sorted. And, you know, like 10 minutes later, he was programming wireless on his own, and, you know, adaptable, you know, and he's a world-class DJ.
Wow.
I know.
Man, I guess to touch on a few of those bands, Marianas Trench, I've seen live a few times. Man, those guys, the harmonies, that's one thing that stands out to me is they'll cut out all the music, and there's just like 3-4 part harmonies that keep going. Like they're like Josh as a singer is unbelievable, but also the harmonies that everyone else is providing is what stands out to me.
Yeah, they're a band. That one harkens back to the Idle Sons days. We did a lot of shows with those guys when they were first coming up, and we were kind of winding down. And one of our last tours actually was with Marianas Trench. We did a co-headline tour across Canada. Basically, we finished a 3 Days Grace tour in Vancouver, and then literally like walked across the street and got back in the van and went across Canada with the Marianas guys. Got to know, you know, Mike, Matt, Ian, and Josh really well over that time. Bonded. As things started taking off for them, you know, fast forward 10 years, kind of out of the blue, I get a call from Andy DeVoe, who was their tour manager at the time, and now we work together in Theory, saying like, oh, the guys would like you to come out and guitar tech. Do you want to come give it a spin? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. You know, like, I love those guys. And same thing, you know, like first couple of shows did not go great. It was their first arena tour. And I remember the first song, my job was to hand Josh a guitar up through the bottom of the stage at the front while he got lowered from the ceiling. And then right beside me, one of the PA techs, Ed McLogan's job was to put the vocal mic up. And there was a specific cue in the intro so we could do it without looking. And they had us wearing these theater masks with these like foot-long noses. And right as the cue's about to come, Ed shouts towards me, "Did we miss the cue?" And I turned to say, "No, buddy, we didn't." And I hit him in the eye with the nose of the mask. And he's like, "Oh, God." And, you know, he falls over, and I go to hand the guitar up, and I miss Josh. And then sort of this guitar is just kind of randomly swinging in the air. He finds it, grabs it. We get the mic stand up. We finish the song. The next song is a guitar switch onto a different guitar, and he starts the song. And because it's all time coded, there's like 4 or 5 seconds for me to run up the guitar and switch it over. And I hadn't noticed that when the follow spot up climbed the ladder to go up to his position, he had pulled out a cable on the rig. So when the song started, the amp switched over to a second amplifier that was no longer on because the power cord had been severed. And Josh is up there banging away on the thing, and it's not working. And I'm just like, oh no, this is show 1 of like 20. Okay. Scramble back down the stairs, looking. And Brett Jameson, who was the other guitar tech on that, was like, "There it is, buddy." You know, and he plugged it back in, and it came to life, and we high-fived each other. And, you know, you sort of like, you know, like.
Do you ever have nightmares about the things that go wrong at concerts? Like
everybody does, I think.
Do you have a nightmare where it's like you're trying to work a show and this isn't working, and that, like, you're just kind of stuck in this?
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the time. I think every tech, to an extent, has that in the back of his mind on every change, on every song. You know, a majority of my time is spent thinking, you know, during a show, like, okay, what's my plan if this happens? What's my plan if that happens? You know, if he breaks the string, what guitar are we switching to? If the amp goes down, what amp are we switching to? You know, if he falls off the stage, who's going to pick him up? Whatever it may be, you know. Yeah, a lot of time, too much of my time probably is spent worrying about what happens when it goes wrong. Because for the most part, it hasn't gone wrong. It's gone right way more than it's gone wrong.
I have I have a couple quotes here, and then I just want to touch on kind of the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic and what's going on now. So these two quotes are from like Canadian rock royalty here. So the first one is from Bill Priddle of Trouble Charger. So you worked a little bit with those guys. So
a little bit.
Bill says, in the short time we worked together, he showed himself to be a true pros pro. He makes sure the trains run on time and with a smile. So that's from Bill. And then
like This Is Your Life.
This Is Your Life. Yeah. It's life is tough out there sometimes. We don't always get positive feedback, even when we're doing a good job. Right. So it's nice to hear some kind words.
No, I don't take praise very well. So
it's all good.
I know hard.
You'll be good at it by the end of this with all the quotes that are here. So the next one is from Glenn Milcham, the drummer from Blue Rodeo. So one of Canada's top drummers here. So Glenn says, this is a long one. So hang tight, grab a tissue. Here we go. Glenn says, I know Bruce from his years as a tour manager and a stage tech. I've worked with him in Blue Rodeo, but also did a tour with him with Ian Thornley. And tying it all together. So he says, after he released the acoustic record I recorded him called Secrets by Ian Fletcher Thornley. That was a bit of a lower budget tour in a van, and Bruce was such a champ. There's no question he's one of the very best techs out there, unfailingly positive and calm in any situation that might befall you on the road, and a total whiz at troubleshooting, gear maintenance, and keeping the delicate egos of his clients undisturbed. A great hang with lots of war stories, and a consummate pro whose years of experience show in everything he does, as solid and dependable as they come. Glenn Milcham. That sounds like he wrote your biography. Like I want that on my tombstone. That was good.
I mean, there is a distinct possibility I may have reached out to Glenn. So
the check's in the mail for Glenn.
This guy might contact you. I need a 5-star Yelp here, buddy.
Yeah. You can't tell him the truth.
Glenn is a sweet, honest, caring guy. The Ian Thornley Fletcher stuff was a lot of fun. It was just Ian, Dave McMillan, and Glenn Milcham and Chris Cadell, who joined Big Rec in the last few years, me and Mark Shaper, who is another backline tech, in a van for a couple of weeks the first time around, and laughing, doing super small venues, venues that guys like Glenn and Ian haven't played since they were in their 20s or teens, and just rolling with the punches on a day-to-day basis. And, I felt like that tour for those guys was just a good release and an easy way to just have fun and not really worry too much about the business side. I mean, the tour made money to an extent, so it wasn't bad. Every show sold out. There's nothing bad there. But it wasn't like, doing like a big theater or arena show. This is 3 guys playing, what would have been a smoky bar. And playing, more esoteric, personal kind of music. I don't think Ian played he played an alternate version of Blowed Wide Open and Under the Lighthouse were the only 2 Big Rec songs he played on that whole tour. And the rest of it was all the stuff on the record. And Mark Howard, who produced the album, he came along as well and mixed the show. And he had a bunch of little micro synths, and he'd be experimenting in front of house. It was a really cool experience and a neat little adventure to be a part of. And, and Glenn was the guy when I came and did Blue Rodeo for a bit, that was helping out John Farnsworth, who was the stage left tech, had left to go do a Black Sabbath tour, as one would do. And I was basically filling in, and Lee Chomiak, who was the stage manager, and the other guitar tech, they were really helped me get my feet in a hurry, because there's a lot going on that. I was taking care of 4 different guys, and there was a lot going on. And Glenn was the guy I could come to and who would, you're doing a good job, man, keep up the good work. And, it was great. And everyone in the band proper, I took care of Greg Keeler, and, Greg's a legend and worth the price of admission. He's just such a maverick and such a cool rock and roll icon. And he would tell me stories about, what guitar he played on Diamond Mine, or, there's a song, what am I doing here? Or, about the Erie County Fair. He's telling me the whole story about the song, and, and occasionally grumble at me, but, I always felt like he had earned it. The only guy that's ever yelled at me is Greg Keeler, and I was so happy that he did. Because I get to say that Greg Keeler
means he cares,
because he's a goddamn legend. And at the end of the tour, he gave me this huge hug, and he was like, "Way to go, buddy! You're part of the gang now." And that was another one that felt pretty awesome.
I did the 2-hour interview with Glenn from Blue Rodeo, and the next time that Blue Rodeo came to Ottawa, I bought some tickets. I brought my mom to go see them, and Glenn was nice enough to hook us up with some backstage passes. So I get back there, and there's Glenn, and there's just the rest of the band hanging out, and I'm talking with Glenn, and then Greg Keeler just comes and joins us. So I just talked with him for a while, and he was, I do a deep dive of an entire discography. So with most artists, there's like 3 albums, maybe 4. Yeah. Blue Rodeo is like 17 albums, greatest hits albums. Each member has like solo albums. So
it goes on and on and on.
Basically, Greg jumped into the conversation when he heard I had listened to the entire discography. So he came over basically like, really? Like that's insane that you went through all that. So anyways, all that to say that Glenn was awesome and hooked my mom and I up with some backstage stuff and hung out with them. And Greg everyone was so nice. All the guys in the band,
real gentlemen.
Yeah. And legends in Canada. I wanted to touch on the pandemic a little bit. So we've already gone over where, the live entertainment industry essentially shut down for various parts over the last 2 years. And even now I see some musicians posting, there's different articles that have been going around showing that conditions are pretty difficult for some bands between at Pearson Airport in Toronto. Over half of the flights just get canceled or never make it, and equipment isn't showing up. And I was talking to Moist, and they were saying that they missed a show in Vancouver. They had a show and the flights weren't arriving. They had to reschedule a show in Vancouver just because of the airlines. And that, they're trying to rent a van, and it's $10,000 just for like a regular van, and gas prices, and it's just the picture that they paint is so horrible. I'm just curious, you on the inside, if things seem to be getting a little bit better, or if that's blown out of proportion. Or
no, it's pretty much as bad as they say it is.
Oh no.
Obviously some factors are out of our control. Fuel costs are fuel costs, and unfortunately, there's production slowdowns and the pandemic, and obviously this terrible war in Ukraine that's altering the world fuel prices. The airline thing is a huge bummer, but that's what happens. You underpay people for so long and then cut them loose and then expect them to come back and work for no money. The price, the salary of a baggage handler is almost the same as someone who works at McDonald's. Why would you want to go do that? Same with like a TSA where it's like $22 an hour or something like that, So a lot of those things is, it's just the way of the world and what we've had to deal with, so you can't change it. Obviously, rental rates on vehicles is totally people squeezing you. A lot of those car companies, because so much of stuff, and even in the airline industry, it's the same way, right? Like, it's a bit of a house of cards, right? You have a fleet of rental vehicles that are leased from some company, and when no one's renting them, you can't make your lease payments, so you have to sell them. So now your inventory is reduced, and now all of a sudden that one Ford Focus seems like it's worth a whole lot more now, isn't it?
It's like a Mercedes now.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very fortunate, working with the Theory of a Dead Man guys. They're mostly based in the United States. We went back to work almost a year ahead of anybody in Canada. And pandemic touring in America last year was a wild ride. I don't even want to potentially estimate how much money would have been lost because of all of the things that we went through, with COVIDs and guys getting sick and having to put guys in hotel rooms and move on and get other guys, and they had to shut down. We had to shut down like a week of shows, and just sit in a parking lot in Lexington, Kentucky for 6 days. I started walking like 12 miles a day. Thankfully, it was the fall, so it was cold in Canada, but still warm in the South. But, stuff like that, and the amount of money it's costing to find equipment, and it goes all the way through the industry. There aren't enough truck drivers, there aren't enough bus drivers, there aren't enough stage hands, there isn't enough equipment. Right now, if you want to rent like a lighting package from a company like Christie Lights, like there's no inventory. It's all out on tour, and everybody's working. And the minute someone gets sick, everything grinds to a halt. It's nerve-wracking, and it says a lot about everybody from the artists all the way down to the crew guys and everyone involved in the whole grand circus, that everyone's still, making things happen, through brute force and ignorance, whatever it takes, and you see it on the faces of the people, that come to the shows, how grateful they are to be able to go out and see bands. And, live streams are great, CDs are great, video, filmed concerts are great, but there's no tangible feeling like being in a room full of like-minded people loving art. There's no other way around it. So hopefully things will sort of level out, because it's going to slow down a little bit, because right now it's bananas. Like we were talking earlier, I flew 45 times in the last, 4 months, going from gig to gig to gig to gig to cover off, to help someone missing somebody, to do gigs, to play to work shows, because everybody is working right now, because everyone's trying to get something back out of how devastating it was for them financially and emotionally.
Yeah, you have 2 years worth of the entire entertainment industry where you make most of your money touring, playing concerts. So basically the entire industry made no money for 2 years, give or take, a year and a half, 2 years. And then all of them at the same time, when the bans are lifted, they all have to come back. So you have bands that haven't toured in forever, all these reunion shows, like literally the world is back on the road at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, a great example for me was with Theory. We were working a new record. The new record came out January 19th, 2020. The first song on that record, History of Violence, went to #1 in the US on rock radio. Boys, we're off to the races, right? This is great. They're very quietly far more successful than anyone realizes. They've had 5, 6 #1s in the US. Off to the races, #1 song, right? It's January 19th. We're starting a tour, sitting at a hotel bar with Harry Mapes, who was our stage manager at the time. And we're listening to the bartender talk about how his girlfriend's a flight attendant that works the Pacific Rim, and that all the flights are canceled, and that there's this thing that's coming, and it's going to shut down the world. And we're laughing between sips of our whiskey, like, nothing shuts down rock and roll. That's never going to happen. So we go through this tour across Canada. It's about a month and a bit. And the tour ends on March 2nd.
It was like March 17th is like the official COVID day?
Get dropped off at the airport on March 2nd. We're supposed to go back out on tour in the US in 2 weeks. That 2 weeks turned into 17 months.
Jeez.
And they had a brand new record that just literally died on the vine. That they had spent a year working on or whatever, that nobody listened to, nobody heard, got no exposure. And so, we're getting ready to go back out on an album cycle with those guys, and for a new album that they recorded just after the pandemic ended, because they were like, well, what are we going to do? No one wants to listen to songs from 2.5 years ago that they've never heard. We just move on. We'll just move on.
It's so tough, because I'm sure the album's amazing, and I'm sure they're proud of it, and it just gets swept under the rug with everything else that happened.
So many people, like so many guys just got the floor pulled right out from them. And a lot of guys, unfortunately with, the environment that we live in, You know, a lot of guys who were otherwise totally great stand-up, sweet people got really bitter and wrapped up in politics and all of the other stuff that's going on with convoys and yelling at people. And hey, man, like, I get it. It's frustrating. You want to get back to life. I totally understand, but you know, like, my aunt died of COVID, you know, like, yeah, sign me up. Give me 4, 8, 12 needles. I've done so many things to myself much worse. You know, but seeing it fracture relationships, you know, we can agree to disagree on healthcare or politics or anything else. We can agree to disagree on that. But for some people, you know, it was the only outlet that they could express their frustration. And it really wrecked a lot of relationships and hurt a lot of people. It might be, you know, the kind of quiet aftershock of this whole thing is, you know, how many people had their lives ruined, not by the pandemic, but how they reacted to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, their inability to get around it and have a resource to help them navigate it.
Yeah. I have one final quote from someone that seems to know what you've been up to during this whole pandemic. Someone's paying attention. So one final quote, and then I have a few of the deeper questions to wrap this up. So this is from Chuck Daly, history bass player with I Mother Earth and the Salads.
That's another one, man. The Salads. We used to do a lot of shows with the Salads, and he's another guy who's just such a cool guy, man.
This guy ends up everywhere too. Every interview I do.
Also a killer backline tech, an amazing bass player, and one of Cottage Country's most affable real estate agents now.
There you go. One of the people that transitioned from the entertainment industry to real estate. I know quite a few during the pandemic, and he's killing it. And he just found out that he has a history of real estate agents in the family that he didn't know, going back to like grandparents and everything. So it's in the blood, man. He's got the salesman blood or the skill to take care of people and all those things. So this is what Chuck says. He says, and this is a long one as well. These guys like writing short stories for you. Chuck says, something that is rare and amazing to find in the touring business is a guy like Bruce. He's incredibly good at the job, but also the sweetest guy. My first gig after being away from the pandemic was a festival with I Mother Earth. One of the first smiles I saw that day was this guy, and I felt a massive wash of happiness roll over me. He's a special guy. Bruce was an anomaly during the pandemic because of how absolute amazing he is. He's one of the few who magically stayed employed in the touring business throughout. This is a true testament to his skill and kindness. Other thing I've noticed about this fine man is that he doesn't take anything for granted. He is super grateful and constantly stoked about the adventure of it all. Whoever gets Bruce on the road is a very lucky band. I love me some Bruce. That's from Chuck. I Mother Earth and the Salads.
It's funny because I love me some Chuck, and I kind of think of Chuck Daly as kind of like a bit of a kindred spirit. We're both retired bass players. Yeah, we pulled a few miles with the Salads back in the day, and he's literally describing himself as much as he's describing me. The pandemic was a thing where a lot of people were willing to give me a chance that I hadn't worked with before. Tim Hicks being a real obvious one. Tim being from St. Catharines and my wife's family being from down the street, being another one of those strange coincidences, as you would say. And it turned out that my father-in-law knew Tim's family. Silverstein was another one. I, came up with those guys. They're Burlington guys and Oakville guys that I knew back in the day, and they needed some help. They were making a movie. They did this 4-night live stream event where they did 3 or 4 2-hour live streams that they sort of compiled into a film across the whole thing, where they did one of their biggest records, Discovering the Waterfront, and then they did a best of set, and then they did a new album, and then they did an acoustic set that we filmed up way north of Milton with Colin Moore from Soundbox doing all the lighting and special effects, and Spencer Arnott, who's the drum tech on that one, was really held my hand and kind of helped me get through that one, And then I'm the local community around where I live. Guys started dropping off guitars to get kind of worked on, and I think I worked on about 200 guitars over the course. And again, like, life's a two-way street. Chris and the guys at Long McQuaid, Tim Park and Wayne Peterson at Long McQuaid in Burlington called up and were like, hey, we've got some stuff that needs fixing and we're kind of short on text. Can you come in and maybe work on some stuff? And people really pitching in. I delivery drove for a bit, which I wouldn't recommend. It's not really a money-making prospect, but it does kill time really well. Yeah, so I count myself lucky to have people like, willing to go out on a limb for me from time to time.
I have two final questions for you. Can you handle two more questions? These are the deeper questions here. So
deeper questions.
Yeah. When you look back on your life and career, what are you most grateful for and what are you most proud
of? I'm going to stifle you by giving the same answer for both questions in the same time. I'm grateful for the chance to be able to have done it, and I'm grateful for the chance to be able to do it.
That's a good answer. And if we could go back in time and you could sit down next to your 10-year-old self. So you have your little 10-year-old self sitting there, cute little Bruce, and you can take all the years you've had since then of experience, of life lessons, of mentorship and training. What do you tell little Bruce to help him on his way through this life?
Your metabolism's going to slow down. Try not to eat too much.
There you go. There's your advice. Where can people find you? If this is one of the 3-hour deep dives that we've gone into now. Where can our listeners? No, there's no. I'm the one asking all these questions. If our listeners want to reach out and say, hey, I love the episode, or hey, I'm looking for this, or they have an opportunity for you, or where do people find you online? Is there Instagram or I don't know, Facebook, or
if it's still a thing for people, professionally speaking, I am on LinkedIn. Although I don't think I know a single person who ever got a job from LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook under my regular name. I have an Instagram account, but it's not really for me. I have a stuffed pig that travels with me. Anyone who knows me knows him.
That's in the picture.
Yeah, he has an Instagram.
Can you show it again for a second?
Yeah, it's a bandana. He has an Instagram. So a thing that I do for Jen, my wife, and for my own personal amusement is he takes pictures on the road when he's out working places and stuff. So he's got an Instagram account, which is totally not Giptel, which is the word piglet spelled backwards, because you don't want to get sued. And those are, I guess, my two social media things. I kind of tend to think that social media is a little poisonous, so I'm not on Twitter.
It's maybe best that you stay off of it. For the Idle Sons fans, the music is still out there on the streaming platforms. The two videos at very low resolution are on YouTube.
The videos at very low resolution are on YouTube. We predated that whole idea of bands having official YouTube channels by a couple of years. So it's a real drag because there is footage of various levels of quality and amusement on YouTube that pretty much runs the gamut of the last year and a half of the band. And yeah, the record's still on iTunes. I think I got 3.5 stars.
That's pretty solid.
Pretty solid.
not too bad. So yeah, as we wrap up, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as a musician on the tech side of the live industry. I want to acknowledge you for the great music that you made with Idle Sons. Again, I was a fan. I went to a couple concerts. I bought that album when it came out. I want to thank you for taking the time today to help raise awareness for the behind the scenes stuff that's going on. So, concert fans, they just show up, things look great, they sound great, and it is what it is. They don't know all the people that are involved. So this helps to add a little bit of clarity for everyone to know that there are hardworking people that are out there that make things run smoothly. And last but not least, I want to thank you for sitting down with me for this interview. A good 3 hours where I can ask questions about Idle Sens, a band that I like, about the entertainment industry that I'm a big fan of. So I really appreciate your time, Bruce. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you, man. It's a real honor to get the opportunity to, spin yarns and tell tall tales here about rock and roll and the music business. And yeah, you're right. You wouldn't be even asking me questions about stuff if it wasn't for the support that I got from, my family, my wife, and all the people that I work with in the business, doing the work, getting the work done. Yeah, it can at times feel insurmountable, and it's nice to be able to shed a little light. So when, you walk into your favorite arena show or club show, you can maybe take a step back and go, wow, somebody probably spent their whole day in this room just trying to make it look half decent and sound good.
So there we go. So to our listeners, to the fans of Bruce, to the fans of Idle Sens, thanks for sticking with us for the last 3 hours, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks a lot for having me.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.